The thing was past the mud wall. I could see it from the chest up, which meant it was taller than the wall. The wall was 9 feet high. The generator had been dead for 2 hours. The diesel was full. The turnover was good. The engine simply would not catch. I had checked it 3 times in the dark, with sand in my teeth and a chem light cracked between my knees, and the engine had stayed quiet the way a thing stays quiet when it has decided to. The mission support site ran on that one generator. Without it, the radios did nothing useful, and the floodlights stood as black towers, and the night came in across the perimeter the way water comes in through a hull breach. I had been a soldier for 9 years, and I had never been afraid of a wall before. My radio clicked. The click was the kind of click you get when somebody keys their hand mic and does not speak. I waited. After 3 seconds, my own voice came back to me through the earpiece, calm and a little tired, saying my own call sign and asking for a status. I had not keyed my radio. I was holding the rifle in both hands. The voice on the radio said my call sign again, and then it said, "Please copy," and the word "please" was not a word I had ever used on a radio in my life. The voice was mine. The mouth that made it was not. That is the moment I would put on the cover of the book if I ever wrote one. Past the mud wall. Sand in the air. My own voice on a dead channel, asking me to copy. My name is Caleb Dorr. I was a staff sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment. I am writing this from a small house in northern Idaho in the spring of 2021, and I am writing it because I want at least one record of it to exist outside the system that buried it. I have changed 2 call signs and 3 grid coordinates. I have not changed the names of the men I served with, because their families know what those names mean, and the families deserve to read what I am about to write before I die or before I lose the ability to write it. The Army knows what I am doing. They have not stopped me. I am not sure why they have not stopped me. I have a guess. I will get to it. The deployment was eastern Syria, Deir ez-Zor Governorate, spring of 2019. We were a small ranger element rotating through a mission support site 40 kilometers north of Abu Kamal, near the Euphrates. The territorial caliphate had collapsed a few months before. The mop-up was ongoing. Our job was unglamorous. We sat in a half-built outpost cobbled together from older mud brick structures and HESCO barriers, and we ran patrols, and we sometimes accompanied partner forces on objectives that had been picked over by other units. Before we got there, there were 8 of us in the squad. There was an interpreter named Bashir Najjar attached to our element. We had been at that MSS for 6 weeks when the tasking came down. I want to walk through the squad before I walk through anything else, because 4 of these men are dead and one of them is not all the way alive, and I do not want their names read off a casualty roster like an afterthought. Sergeant Wyatt Pell ran the Alpha team. Wyatt was from a town in eastern Tennessee that I had never heard of, and that he described, when pressed, as a single road with 2 churches on it. He had a wife named Erin and a daughter who had been born during his second deployment, which meant he had met her at 4 months old. He talked about her constantly, in the small ways men talk about children, when they want to remember they have something to come home to. Wyatt was a good team leader. He was not the smartest man in the squad. He was the most reliable. Sergeant Bennett Krause ran Bravo team. Bennett was from Wisconsin, a corn-fed farm boy with a face that did not show emotion easily and a voice that always sounded a half-step softer than the room. He read books in the field. He carried a Cormac McCarthy paperback in his assault pack on every patrol I ever saw him on, and he would not lend it. Bennett was the man you wanted next to you in a building entry. He was also the man who walked out into the desert on the second night, and when we got him back his eyes did not track the same way they had before, and the man who came back with us is not the man who left. Specialist Travis Holm was the RTO. Travis was 25, from outside Boise, divorced once already, had a girlfriend back home with a daughter named Kayla who was not his biologically, but who he had been raising since she was 3. Travis was the first one to notice the voice on the radio was wrong. He had a good ear. He told me once that he had wanted to be a sound engineer before he enlisted, and that he could hear the seam in any recording. I believed him. Specialist Owen Mendel was our medic. Owen was from Pennsylvania, a small kid with quick hands and a calm voice, the kind of medic who could put a tourniquet on a man with one hand while pulling another casualty by the drag handle with the other. Owen was the person you trusted to tell you if something was wrong with one of your men. He was the first person to look at Trent and tell me, quietly, that he wanted Trent on the next bird out. We did not get a bird. Owen never said I told you so. Specialist Trent Ashby was the saw gunner. Trent was the biggest man in the squad, a former farm league baseball player from a town in Texas with a name I could not pronounce the first time he said it. Trent could carry the SAW and 1,000 rounds and still keep up with the rest of the squad on a foot march through bad terrain. He was the one who entered the chamber first. He was the door. Specialist Silas Ritter was the second rifleman in Alpha Team. Silas was 23. He had a wife and an infant son. He was a quiet man who smiled often. He died on the second night at the South Wall, before any of us understood what we were dealing with. Specialist Hayden Voss was the second rifleman in Bravo Team. Hayden was 22 and on his second deployment. His mother had raised him alone. He talked about her with no irony and no embarrassment, in a way I have not heard many young men talk about their mothers. The voice on the radio on the third night used hers. Hayden walked out past the salt line at 0200 and the sand took him. We never recovered him. He is still listed as missing. That is the squad. 8 Rangers, plus Bashir. Bashir was 53 years old when I met him. He had been a teacher of secondary school history before the war. His village was about 30 kilometers from our MSS, in a stretch of rural agricultural land along the Euphrates that had been fought over so many times by so many parties that there was no longer any practical sense in calling it controlled by anyone. His family had scattered. 2 of his sons were in Germany, 1 was dead. His wife was in Lebanon with his daughter. He had stayed because his mother had refused to leave the village, and after his mother died of natural causes in the winter of 2017, he had stayed because he had nowhere else to go, and because the interpreter program paid in dollars. He was a thin man with a careful manner and a precise English vocabulary that he had learned, he told me, from reading the same 3 novels for 30 years. He preferred to be addressed as Bashir, not as Mr. Najjar. He drank tea in a way that suggested he had been drinking tea since before any of us were born. He carried a small leather notebook that he wrote in every night, and that I never saw the inside of. Of all the things I lost over there, his friendship is the one I think about most often, and the one I am most certain I will not get back. Our element leader at the MSS was Sergeant First Class Colton Ramey. Colt was a career man, 38 years old, on his 5th or 6th deployment, depending on how you counted. He was a good NCO. He covered for us when we needed covering. He pushed back on bad taskings when he could push back. He liked Bashir, which was not a given with senior NCOs and interpreters in that period. He is part of why I will write what I am about to write. He listened to every word of my debrief, and he believed me. And he was the only one above me in the chain who I am sure believed me. And he is dead now of a heart attack at age 41. And so the question of what he could have done with what he knew is academic. I will start with the morning the tasking came in. It was a Tuesday in late March. The Badia in March is cold in the morning and warm by 10 in the morning, and warm verging on hot by mid-afternoon. We had finished a foot patrol the night before, 4 kilometers out and 4 kilometers back along an old goat track, and we were sleeping in shifts. I was up at 6 because I am bad at sleeping past 6, and I was outside the chow tent with a metal cup of coffee that was about half coffee and half grounds, watching the light come up over the eastern fence line. Colt walked over and told me to come into the TOC. He did not say what about. The way he said it told me to bring my notebook. In the TOC there was a captain I had not met before. He was an Army officer in clean fatigues, a J-2 intel officer flown in from Fob Green Village on a helicopter that morning. His name on the Velcro was Atwood. His shoulder patch was a unit I did not know. He was probably 33, tall, with a face that did not give anything away. He shook my hand and offered me a chair and pulled up a map on the laptop that was set up in the back corner of the TOC. The map was the kind of overhead imagery you got from coalition assets, high resolution, with a graphical overlay showing a circled point in the open desert about 35 kilometers east-northeast of our position. He said his unit had received a human report from a tribal source. The source was new, but had been vetted for a small purchase of ammunition 6 weeks prior, and the small purchase had panned out. The report stated that there was a buried ISIS cache at the circled location, roughly the size of a shipping container, used between 2017 and 2018 by a small ISIS cell that had subsequently been killed in a coalition strike. The cache had been forgotten. The source claimed it contained small arms, RPGs, and possibly a stockpile of handheld anti-aircraft weapons. The captain wanted us to confirm or deny the cache. If we confirmed, we were to render it inoperable. I asked him what was at the location. He said the imagery showed a partially exposed stone structure, possibly a water cistern, possibly a tomb, hard to tell from imagery alone. He said the ground signature was inconsistent. He showed me on the laptop. I looked at the imagery for about 30 seconds. The thing on the imagery did not look like a cistern. It did not look like an ISIS cache. It looked like a piece of cut stone that had been there for a very long time. The ground around it was darker than the surrounding desert. There was no road to it. There was no track to it. The nearest village was 18 kilometers away. The nearest known ISIS activity in the area had been over a year ago. I said the location did not make sense for a cache. The captain said the location was confirmed. He said the source had been to the site. I asked who had vetted the source for this particular report. He said his shop had vetted it. He said the report was solid. He said the tasking had come down from the combined joint task force level and was on the patrol schedule for the following morning. He said my squad was to execute. He said he wanted Bashir attached for any local human contact along the way, although the area was unpopulated. He said the operation was named ReadStem, which is the kind of meaningless operational name that gets generated by a computer at the Joint Task Force. I asked if I could get a backup ground element. He said no. The op was small footprint. Just my squad, 2 MRAPs, in and out in a single day. I asked about overhead. He said he had a Reaper allocated for our window. I asked about quick reaction force. He said the QRF at FOB was on standby. I asked about pre-mission ISR runs. He said there had been one already, and the imagery was what we had. I asked if I could read the source report. He said the source report was compartmented above my clearance. That is the moment I would mark, looking back, as the moment I should have refused. I did not refuse. I have carried that with me for more than 2 years, and I will carry it for the rest of my life. I had a tasking from a captain in clean fatigues who was not part of my chain, and I had a SFC sitting in the back of the room who was nodding at me to take it, and I had a squad of 8 men whose families I had met at the deployment ceremony, and I said, "Yes, sir, we will execute." I want to be honest about why I said yes. I said yes because saying no would have required me to articulate what I was suspicious about, and what I was suspicious about was that the imagery did not look like a cache, and that is a thin reason to refuse a tasking from a captain in front of your SFC. I said yes because the small parts of my brain that were saying do not go were small parts, and the loud parts were saying you have done 100 of these and it is fine. I said yes because I trusted the system. I had never been given a tasking that was a lie before. I assumed taskings came down for reasons. I assumed if there was something off about it, the system would catch it before it reached me. The system had never failed me before. I said yes, and I went to find Bashir. Bashir was in the small lean-to at the back of the MSS, where the local national staff slept, drinking tea on a folding chair with the door propped open with a cinder block. I sat down on the cinder block and explained what I was about to explain. I told him we had a tasking for the next morning. I told him the location. I gave him the coordinates. He did not move while I said the coordinates. When I finished, he set the tea down on the dirt next to his chair, very carefully. He looked past me at the eastern horizon, where the light was just beginning to lean toward white, and he sat that way long enough that I asked him if he had heard me. He said yes, he had heard me. He said he would go. I asked him if there was something I should know about the location. He thought for a long time. I waited. He said, "The area is empty, Saidi. There is no village within 20 kilometers. There has not been a village near that place for as long as anyone remembers. He said, the people who once lived in the area called it by a name that means the place where the wind cannot rest. He said, that is the polite name. The other name I will not say. I asked him what the other name was. He shook his head. He said names were not idle things. He said that in the language his grandfather had spoken, names were a kind of ownership, and a name spoken aloud in the wrong place was an invitation. He said, it is better to say nothing here. He said, there is a story attached to that place. The story is older than the war. The story is older than my grandfather's grandfather. The story is older than Islam. I asked him to tell me the story. He looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student who has asked the wrong question and who needs to be turned away from the question without being shamed for asking it. He said, Sayyidi, please, ask not. He said, if you must go, then we go. I will be there. I will stand outside while you do your work. I will not enter. I would prefer that you also not enter. If you must enter, I would prefer that you not break anything inside. If you must break something inside, I would prefer that you do not touch anything that is held in a circle or marked by a star. I told him those instructions were specific. He said, yes. I told him I appreciated the specificity. He said, I do not say these things lightly, Sayyidi. I am a teacher of history. I do not believe most stories. I believe this one because my grandfather told it to me, and my grandfather did not believe in stories either. He told me only the ones he knew were true. I asked him, what kind of story? He said, a story of fire. He said, a story of something that was placed in the earth by men who could place such things in the earth, and who did so to keep the world from having to bear it. He said, the seal that was placed there was not made by hands you would recognize. The men who made it knew what they were doing. They knew because they had failed before, and because the failure had cost them. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, please ask the captain to choose another location. I said the location was not negotiable. He said, then I will pray, Sayyidi. I will pray, and I will go with you. I sat with him for another 20 minutes. We did not say much. He poured me tea. He poured himself more tea. He set out a small handful of dates on a tin plate. We ate the dates and drank the tea and watched the light come up the rest of the way, and I did not press him further on the story, and he did not offer it. When I left to go brief Wyatt and Bennett, the wind had not yet shifted. The wind was coming out of the southwest, from the direction of the river, the way it had been coming for 3 weeks. By the time we returned from the site the next afternoon, the wind would be coming out of the east, hot and dry and full of fine grit, the kind of wind that comes off a desert that is not the Syrian desert, off a desert that is somewhere else entirely. I noticed the change, without thinking about it, the way a sailor notices a change in the way the boat sits. I would think about it later. I briefed Wyatt and Bennett in the team house at 0900. I laid out the imagery. I gave them the coordinates, the route, the dismount point, the approach, the actions on objective, the actions on contact, the exfil. I told them the cache might be a stone structure rather than a buried container. I told them the local intel suggested we should not enter unless necessary, and should not break anything inside if we did enter. I did not tell them the rest of what Bashir had said. I am not proud of this. I told myself I was filtering the unscientific from the actionable. I was protecting my own credibility with my team leaders. I was minimizing local color in a brief that was already going to be received with some skepticism. Wyatt asked me what kind of stone structure. I said cut stone, old, possibly pre-Islamic, possibly older. He said, how old is older? I said I did not know. Bennett asked who was sourcing the intel. I said the J2 shop, vetted source, level above my clearance. Bennett did not say anything. He was looking at the imagery. He pinched the screen to zoom in on the structure. The lintel was visible, just barely, in the high resolution. There were marks on it. He said, those carvings. I said, yes, those carvings. He said, do we have a translation? I said, no. He said, do we want a translation? I said I would ask Bashir to translate them on site. Bennett looked up at me. He said, do you want my honest read on this tasking? I said, yes. He said, it smells. I said, I know. He said, "I am with you. Just saying." We went over the load plan. Standard kit. Plate carriers, helmets, 3 days of water in case the MRAPs broke down on the way back, 2 days of food, full combat load of 5.56 and 7.62 for the SAW, 1 breaching charge in case the structure was buried more than imagery showed. I had a 30-foot fast rope that I tossed in the lead vehicle on principle, although there was no plan to use it. We packed iron stakes for tying down the antenna mast we were going to set up in case we needed to call FOB without the vehicle radio. I would think about those iron stakes later. I would think about how much iron we had with us on that mission. I would think about whether any of it had mattered, and I would conclude that some of it had, and that not enough of it had. We went through pre-combat checks at 1500. At 1800 we ate. At 1900, Wyatt and I walked the perimeter once together because he was nervous, and walking the perimeter is what we do when we are nervous. At 2000, I told the team to get 4 hours of sleep. At 0000, we were up. At 0100, we were rolling. The first thing I noticed when we rolled out the gate was that Bashir had a small bundle in his lap that he had not had before. It was wrapped in a black cotton scarf. He did not offer to show me what was inside it. I did not ask. I will tell you now what was inside it, because I learned later. There was a small wooden bowl, a small cloth bag of coarse salt, an iron nail about 3 inches long, and a folded sheet of paper covered in handwritten Arabic in his own script. It was a copy of a passage from the Quran, Surah 113, called Al-Falaq, the Daybreak. The passage is a prayer for protection from the evil of darkness when it gathers, from the evil of those who blow on knots, and from the evil of the envier when he envies. It is a prayer that observant Muslims often recite at the threshold of the night, the way some Christians recite a prayer before bed. Bashir had folded the paper into a small square and tucked it into the inside of his shirt, against his chest. He kept it there the entire mission. He kept it there for a long time afterward, I assume, although I have no way of knowing. We drove east-northeast across the Badia for 2 hours. The Badia at night is one of the strangest landscapes I have ever moved through. There is no light pollution. The stars come down to the horizon. The road is not a road, only the worn track of vehicles that have been there before, and even that track fades in places, and the GPS guides you across pure flat dirt with nothing on it for kilometers. We saw 2 foxes in the headlights and a flight of some kind of bird that I did not recognize, and otherwise we saw nothing, and we heard nothing but the engines and the wind and the steady beep of the encrypted radio doing its check-ins. We dismounted about 3 kilometers short of the objective. The ground in the immediate vicinity was unstable for the MRAPs, and we did not want to broadcast our approach by engine noise besides. We set up the vehicles in a hasty hide site behind a low-rise. Wyatt left 2 men with the vehicles. The rest of us moved on foot. We approached from the south. Light was just starting in the east, the kind of pre-dawn gray that is not yet light, but is no longer night. The first thing I noticed about the approach was that the wind had stopped. I had been moving in a steady 5 to 10 knot wind from the southwest the whole drive. About a kilometer from the objective, the wind died completely, not slackened, stopped. I have been in deserts in 3 different countries. I have never had the wind stop the way it stopped that morning. It stopped the way a clock stops when its battery dies. The second thing I noticed was the smell. There was a smell in the air that was hard to place, burnt, old, like a fire that had been put out a long time ago and had been rained on, and then the rain had dried up, and the smell of the wet ash had stayed in the dirt for a season. I asked Wyatt if he smelled it. He said yes. Owen, the medic, walking behind me, said it smelled like the inside of a chimney. Bashir, walking last, said nothing. I looked back at him. He had his hand inside his shirt, against his chest, where the folded paper was. The third thing I noticed was Bashir's pace. He had been keeping up with us for the first 2 kilometers. The last kilometer he fell back, not because he was tired, because he wanted to. He was placing his feet very deliberately. He was moving with the specific slow walk of a man approaching something he did not want to approach. I stopped the formation and waited for him to catch up. He waved me on with his free hand. I motioned him to my side. I asked him quietly if he was all right. He nodded. He said, in English, "It is closer than I thought." I asked what was closer than he thought. He said, "The place." He said, "I had hoped, when you gave me the coordinates, that the place I was thinking of was elsewhere. It is not elsewhere. This is the place from the story." We were now perhaps 400 meters from the objective. The sky was light enough that I could see the structure with the naked eye. It was lower than I had expected, maybe 1.5 meters above the ground at its highest point. Squared off, cut stone, weathered to the color of old bone. It sat in a slight depression in the desert floor, as if the earth around it had been lower at some point and the wind had filled it in over centuries, leaving the structure half submerged. The lintel that the captain had pointed out on the imagery was visible above what I assumed was the entrance. I said, "Tell me the story now, Bashir." He looked at me. He said, "There is no time, Sayyidi." He said, "There is also no point. You have been ordered to enter. You will enter. The story will not change what you do." He said, "I will tell you the names if you wish." I said I did not need the names yet. He said, "That is wise." We continued the approach. At 200 meters I called a halt, and we observed the structure for 10 minutes. There was no movement. There were no thermals other than the ambient ground temperature, slightly cooler than the surrounding earth, which Wyatt remarked on quietly through the team net. The structure was the only feature in any direction. No outbuildings, no tracks in the dirt around it, no sign of recent disturbance. If an ISIS cell had used this place in 2017, there should have been some evidence of foot traffic. Even after 18 months of weather, there was none. At 100 meters, I called a final halt. Bashir was now standing about 30 meters behind us, having stopped of his own accord. I motioned him forward. He shook his head. He pointed at the ground in front of him, as if to say, "This is as far as I go." I moved back to him. I asked him, quietly, what the carvings on the lintel said. He looked at the structure. He squinted. He said, "I cannot read all of them from here. I can read some." He said, "There is a name. There is a binding. There is a warning." He said, "The warning says, in a language older than mine, that this house was sealed by the hand that knew how to seal such houses, and that the hand that opens it again will be marked." He said, "It is a polite warning. The carvings beneath it, which I cannot read from here, will be less polite." I asked him what hand had sealed it. He said, "The carvings invoke Suleiman, peace be upon him, King Solomon, in your tradition." He said, "But Suleiman is invoked, not credited." He said, "The seal is older than Suleiman. It was placed by hands that came before him. Suleiman's name was added to the warning later, the way a property owner adds his name to a fence built by an earlier owner." He said, "This is my reading. I am not a scholar. I read what I see." I asked him what was inside. He said, "Nothing, if the seal has held." He said, "If the seal has held, then there is a chamber, and the chamber is empty, in the way a prison cell is empty when the prisoner is contained." He said, "The prisoner is the chamber is the seal. The walls are the bars." He said, "Do not break the bars, Sayyidi." I said the order was to confirm and destroy. He said, "I know." I said the order was specific. He said, "Yes." He said, "I have been thinking about this for the entire walk. I have been thinking about whether I would tell you what I am about to tell you, or whether I would let you do what you have been ordered to do and discover for yourself what the orders meant. I have decided to tell you. I will say this once, and I will not say it again. There is something inside the chamber. It has been there for a very long time. It does not want to come out. The seal does not exist to keep it inside. The seal exists to keep us from going in." He said, "The people who placed the seal were not afraid that the thing would escape. They were afraid that we, in our curiosity and our stupidity, would find it and let it out." I said I would tell the captain. He said, "The captain is gone, Sayyidi." The captain flew back to the FOB. "The captain will not answer the radio if you call him." He said, "The order is yours to execute." I sat with that for a long moment. Wyatt was watching me from the formation. Bennett was watching me from the other side. Trent was standing a little forward, the saw slung across his chest, the way he stood when he was getting ready to move. Owen was looking at Bashir. Travis was on the radio, doing his check-ins. Silas and Hayden were on rear security. I keyed up. I told Wyatt and Bennett to come over. They came over. I told them what Bashir had told me. I did not editorialize. I gave it to them flat. I told them the structure was old, much older than the intel suggested, that the carvings invoked King Solomon, that Bashir believed there was something sealed inside, and that we should not break the seal. Wyatt said, "Sergeant, what do you want to do?" I said the order was to confirm and destroy. I said we were going to confirm. I said we would not destroy. Bennett said, "You can call that in." I said, "I am going to call that in." I went to Travis. I told him to raise FOB. He raised FOB. I gave them my call sign and my situation report. I told them we were on objective, 100 meters off, that the structure on site was older than the intel had suggested, possibly an archaeological structure, and that I requested a hold on the destruction order pending review. I asked them to relay to Captain Atwood. They told me to wait. We waited 11 minutes. The response came back. The destruction order was rescinded. The confirmation order was modified. We were to enter the structure, document any contents, and exfil. We were not to destroy anything. We were to obtain photographs of the interior and report findings. I acknowledged. I dropped the handset back into Travis's vest. I felt the small relief of not having to plant a charge on something that Bashir had asked me not to plant a charge on. I told myself this was the right call. I told myself the order had been adjusted in response to my judgment, and the system had worked the way it was supposed to work. I believed this for about 3 minutes. I told Wyatt to set up an outer perimeter with Silas and Hayden. I told Bennett to come with me, with Trent and Owen. Travis would stay with Wyatt for comms. Bashir would stay at the perimeter line, where he had stopped. We moved up. At 20 meters from the structure, I felt the cold. The structure was throwing cold out of it the way a freezer throws cold when you open it. The air around the entrance was perceptibly colder than the air around the rest of the structure. I could see Trent's breath when he stepped into the threshold zone, even though it was 45 degrees Fahrenheit in the open desert and the sun was up and we were in spring. The entrance was a low rectangular opening, about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, oriented to the southeast. The lintel above it bore the carvings Bashir had read from 100 meters away. Up close, I could see there were 3 rows of them, each in a different script. The top row was the largest and the most weathered. I did not recognize any of the scripts. There was a star carved in the center of the lintel, 8-pointed, set inside 2 concentric circles. The star was the only piece of carving that did not look weathered. It looked freshly cut, although nothing had been freshly cut here for thousands of years. Trent was standing nearest to the entrance. Trent was the saw gunner, which made him also the largest man in the squad, a good 6'4", 220 pounds. He was crouched at the entrance, looking inside. He turned to me. He said, "It is bigger inside than it looks." I said, "How big?" He said, "I cannot see the back. The light is bad. There is a chamber." I told him to go in and look. I told him to keep the saw slung. I told him not to touch anything. I told him to count his steps and tell me how many it took to reach the back wall. He went in. I waited at the entrance with Bennett and Owen. I could see Trent's headlamp moving inside, swinging across the interior. Trent was counting under his breath. I could hear it through the mic on the team net. He counted 6. He counted 7. He counted 8. He stopped at 8. He said, "There is a slab here. It is in the middle of the floor. It is round. It is set into the floor." I said, "Anything else?" He said, "There is a smell. It smells like a campfire that has been put out wrong." I said, "Any contents? Anything ISIS could have used?" He said, "It is empty. The chamber is empty. There are no boxes. There is no debris. There is nothing on the walls that I can see except more carvings in that same script. The slab in the middle of the floor is the only feature." I said, "Come back out." He said, "I want a picture of the slab." I said, "Take it." I heard the click of his camera. He was using the standard team camera that we passed around for site exploitation. He took 3 pictures. He said he was coming back out. He came back out. The pictures on the camera, when I looked at them later in the MRAP, showed a round stone slab about 1 meter in diameter, set flush with the floor, carved with the same 8-pointed star inside the same 2 concentric circles that I had seen on the lintel. The star on the slab was the same unweathered freshness as the one on the lintel. It was the only sharp carving in a chamber of softened, weathered stone. Trent stood up at the entrance and brushed the dirt from his knees, and he looked at me, and he was not all the way fine. I asked him what was wrong. He said he did not know. He said he felt like he had eaten something that did not agree with him. He said he was thirsty. Owen handed him his Nalgene. He drank half of it. He handed it back. He shook his head once, the way you shake water out of your ear. He said he was good. He said he wanted to clear the entrance and let me see what he had seen. I went in. The interior of the chamber was about 10 feet on a side, ceiling about 6 feet high, lower toward the back. The walls were the same cut stone as the exterior, fitted without mortar, the joints so tight that I could not have slipped a knife between them. The carvings ran around the interior at chest height, in 3 bands, the same 3 scripts I had seen on the lintel. The smell Trent had described was stronger inside, burnt and old. Underneath the burnt smell there was something else, something sweet that I could not place, the way mold smells sweet under the smell of dust in an old basement. The slab in the center of the floor was exactly as Trent had described, a meter in diameter, set flush, carved with the 8-pointed star in 2 concentric circles, the same unweathered cut. There was a small round depression in the very center of the star, about the size of a thumb. The depression was perhaps a centimeter deep. I looked at the depression for a long time. It was the kind of depression that asks to be filled, the kind of depression that is shaped like a place where a thumb would go. I did not put my thumb in it. I left the chamber. I came back out into the air. I told Bennett to look, but not to touch anything, and especially not to touch the slab. He went in. He came out. He confirmed what Trent and I had seen. I called Wyatt and Travis up. I put it on the team net. I told them what we had found. I asked Travis to raise FOB and confirm what to do with it. I said, into the mic, that the structure was a sealed chamber with no contents and one feature, a stone slab carved with what appeared to be a religious symbol. I asked for guidance. Travis came back 2 minutes later. He said FOB had relayed. The guidance was, photograph the slab, exit the chamber, exfil. The structure was to be left undisturbed. I said copy. I said it again. I said copy. Trent was standing at the entrance, the saw across his chest. He was looking down at the slab through the open doorway. He said we should crack the slab. I said, we have orders not to. He said, we will not know what is under it. I said, we will not know. He said, it is right there. I said, we have orders, Trent. He said after a pause, Roger that. He stepped back from the entrance. I have replayed that exchange in my head 5,000 times. I have replayed it with audio. I have replayed it slowed down. I have replayed it imagining I had been 3 feet to the left or to the right. I have replayed it imagining I had told Trent to step back from the entrance 10 seconds earlier than I told him to. I do not know if it would have made a difference. I do not know if Trent had already touched the depression with the toe of his boot, or with the buttstock of the saw, or with anything else, when he was alone in the chamber for those 90 seconds. I do not know if he put his thumb in the depression and then took it out. I do not know if it was the boot, or the thumb, or simply his presence inside the seal that did it. I will never know. He never told me, and after that morning I am not certain he was the one who could have told me. I told the team to fall back on the structure to 100 meters. I told Bennett to make sure Bashir was all right. We pulled back. The wind came up again as we walked back toward the dismount point. It was coming from the east now, where there had been no wind before, and it was warm. I did not realize the wind had changed direction until we were in the MRAPs and rolling. Owen mentioned it from the crew compartment. He said, weird, the wind shifted. Anyone else clock that? I had clocked it. I had not clocked it consciously. I had clocked it the way the body clocks small wrong things and stores them for later. We drove back to the MSS. The drive took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Trent was quiet for most of it. He drank water once, when Owen offered it. He stared out the porthole at the desert. I looked at him twice, and his face was the face of a man with a small headache, focused and a little unhappy, and nothing more. I told myself he was probably dehydrated. I told myself the chamber had been cold and his body had been thrown off. I told myself a number of things. We rolled back through the gate at 1400. Bashir went straight to the lean-to without speaking. He shut the door. I heard the cinder block scrape across the dirt as he wedged it against the inside of the door. He had never wedged the door from the inside before. He would not come out for 2 days, except to use the latrine, and he would not speak to any of us, except to nod when spoken to, until the next afternoon, when I went and sat on the dirt in front of his door and asked him through it to please tell me what was happening. I went to the TOC, I wrote up the after action, I uploaded the photographs from the camera to the secure server, I sent the report up through the system, I closed out the mission. Colt asked me if everything went okay. I told him the truth. I told him the structure was older than the intel had suggested, that we had found no cache, that we had photographed an interior slab and exfilled. I told him I thought the tasking had been bad. I told him Bashir had been disturbed by the place. Colt nodded. He said, Atwood is gone already. Got on the helicopter at 0700. He said, noted. He said, write it up clean. I wrote it up clean. I went to find Trent. He was in his bunk, on top of the sleeping bag, his boots still on. He was sweating. The room was cool. Owen was already in there, taking his temperature. Owen looked up at me. He said, 101.4. I said, he was fine on the way back. Owen said, he is not fine now. Trent opened his eyes. He looked at me. The eyes were Trent's eyes. The pupils tracked. He smiled the small, tired smile he always smiled when he was sick. He said, I am okay, Sergeant. I am just tired. He said, I think it is the cold. Owen said, I want him on the next bird out. I said, when is the next bird? Owen said, tomorrow midday, weather permitting. I said, keep him in. Get fluids in him. I will adjust the watch rotation. Owen said, copy. I went out to the watchboard and took Trent off the night rotation. I split his shifts among Wyatt and Bennett. I did not put him on any post that night. He stood the first watch anyway. I did not know he had stood the first watch. I had told him not to. I had told Wyatt to take Trent's shift. Wyatt had taken Trent's shift. Wyatt was at the North Tower at 2200 when he heard Travis call to him over the team net and ask if he had cleared the south wall. Wyatt said no. Wyatt said the south wall was not in his sector. Travis said he had just heard a call from the south wall on the team net that sounded like Trent calling in his check at 2200. Wyatt said Trent was not on the watch. Travis said he knew that. Travis said that was why he was raising it. Travis came to me. Travis was holding the radio, and he had the look on his face he had when something was wrong with the audio. He said, Sergeant, you need to hear this. He played back the recording. The recording was the team net on the channel Trent would have used if Trent had been on watch at the south wall, which he was not. The voice on the recording said, South wall, 2200 check, all secure. The voice was Trent's. The cadence was not. I will explain what I mean by cadence. Every man speaks with his own rhythm. The rhythm is the spaces between his words and the way his consonants land, and the small ways his breathing breaks across the syllables. Trent had a slow cadence. He paused before he said all secure. He always paused before he said all secure. He had been paused before secure for the entire deployment. The voice on the recording did not pause. The voice on the recording said all secure on the same exhalation as 2200 check in a smooth, uninterrupted line, the way a man reads a sentence from a script when he has not memorized it but can read very well. I said to Travis, that is not Trent. Travis said, I know. I said, where is Trent? Travis said, in his bunk. I went to Trent's bunk. Trent was in his bunk. He was on top of the sleeping bag. His boots were on. He was asleep, or appeared to be asleep. Owen was sitting on a footlocker reading a paperback by Red Lens. I said to Owen quietly, has Trent left this room since 1700? Owen said, no. I said, are you sure? Owen said, I have not left this room since 1700. I said, not even for the latrine. Owen said, not even for the latrine. I went back to the TOC and pulled the recording up on the laptop. I listened to it 3 times. I had Travis listen to it again. I had Wyatt listen to it. Wyatt said, that is not Trent's cadence. I put it down to comms interference. I told myself the digital encryption sometimes did weird things to voice. I told myself that was the explanation. I knew that was not the explanation. I told myself it anyway, because the alternative had no operational use to me. There was no procedure for what the alternative would have meant. There was no playbook entry. There was no after-action template. I had a man in a bunk and a voice on the radio that was not his, and an order to keep the MSS running until the bird came at midday tomorrow. I made the call to log it as an anomaly and move on. I logged it as an anomaly. I did not move on. I sat in the TOC for another hour, listening to the team net, my own ear dialed in to the cadence of every man's voice. 2300 check from the North Tower. Wyatt, cadence right. 2300 check from the East Gate. Silas, cadence right. 2300 check from the South Wall. Bennett, who I had put on the South Wall in Trent's absence. Cadence right. I made it to 0100 without another incident. I went to my own bunk. I slept 3 hours. At 0400, Owen woke me up. He said Trent was asking for me. I went to Trent's room. Trent was sitting up in his bunk. The fever was down. His eyes tracked. He looked tired. He looked like Trent. He smiled at me when I sat down on the footlocker, and he said, "Sergeant, I am sorry for the trouble." I said, "No trouble. You are sick." He said, "I have a question." I said, "Ask." He said, "Did I make the 2200 call?" I said, "No." He said, "I dreamed I made the call." I said, "You dreamed it." He said, "I dreamed I was at the South Wall and the wind was coming up, and I made the call. I dreamed I was looking out at the desert, and the desert was very large." He said, "I dreamed I saw something in the desert." He said, "I dreamed the something saw me back." I said, "What did it look like?" He said, "Tall." He stopped. He looked at the wall behind me for a long moment. I had not asked him a follow-up question. I waited. He looked back at me, and his eyes were Trent's eyes, and the pupils tracked, and he said, "I dreamed I let it in, Sergeant." He said, "I dreamed I told it the names." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "It is a dream, Trent." He said, "Yes, Sergeant." He said, "I am sorry. Anyway." He laid back down. He closed his eyes. He went back to sleep. I sat on the footlocker for a long time. Owen sat on the bunk across from me. Owen did not say anything. I did not say anything. I watched Trent breathe in and out in the slow, even way he had always breathed in his sleep. And I watched him, and I thought about what it would have looked like on the recording if a man had stood at the South Wall at 2200 and read all secure off a script he was not used to reading, in a voice he had borrowed and was not yet fluent in. I went back to the TOC at 0500. I drank coffee. I waited for the sun. The wind was coming from the east. The sun came up red. Trent's fever broke around 0700. He came out of his bunk at 0800, walked to the chow tent, and ate a small breakfast of oatmeal and instant coffee. He moved like a man who had been sick the day before and was a little wrung out, and his color was off. He sat with Owen at the corner table. Owen watched him eat. After breakfast, Trent went outside to the smoking area. He did not smoke. He stood there in the early sun for 10 minutes and looked east, and then he went back to his bunk and slept until 11. I went to Bashir's lean-to at 0900. The cinder block was still wedged against the inside of the door. I sat down on the dirt outside the door. I said his name, quietly, and waited. After a long pause, he spoke from inside. He said, "Sayyidi." I said, "I need to talk to you, Bashir." He said, "Not now, Sayyidi. Forgive me. I am praying I will speak with you tonight." I said, "I would like it to be sooner." He said, "Tonight, after dark, please. I am not strong yet." I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "I am alive." I said, "When did you eat last?" He said, "I have water. I have dates. I am all right." I sat against the door for another minute. I did not push him. I knew the kind of door I was on the wrong side of. He was preparing himself for something. He had not prepared himself for it before now, because he had not believed it would come. Now he believed it. He needed time. I could give him until dark. I went back to the TOC. I told Colt I wanted to put the MSS on heightened alert overnight. I told him I had a hunch. I did not tell him about the recording. Colt looked at me for a long second and said, "You have a hunch?" I said, "Yes, I have a hunch." Colt said, "Do you want me to call Fob?" I said no. I said I just wanted the watch doubled up. He nodded. He said, "I trust your hunches, Caleb." He went and adjusted the watchboard. He put 2 men on every post for the night, instead of 1. I did not put Trent on any post. I want to put a small note in here about what kind of place the MSS was physically, because the layout will matter in a little while. The MSS was an irregular, roughly rectangular footprint, about 150 meters on the long axis, 80 meters on the short axis. The perimeter was a combination of mud brick wall, originally part of an older structure that had been on the site before us, and HESCO barriers stacked too high on the sections where the mud brick had been knocked down or had not been built in the first place. The walls ranged from 7 feet to 9 feet in height. The mud brick sections were the original portions of the older structure. The older structure had been, as best we could tell, a small fortified compound built sometime in the 19th century, probably as an Ottoman administrative outpost. It had been abandoned and reoccupied a number of times since. Coalition forces had taken it as an MSS in 2017 and had built it up. There was a main gate on the north wall, 2 watchtowers at the northwest and northeast corners, a lower observation post on the south wall, and an east gate that we used for vehicle exit when going on patrol. The interior contained the TOC building, the team house, a small chow tent, the latrine and shower trailer, the local national lean-to where Bashir slept, 2 generator sheds, an ammunition can-do, and the hide site for the MRAPs. There were 3 iron flagpoles, one with the American flag, one with no flag, and one with a small windsock that was always wrong about the wind. There was an irrigation canal that ran past the southwest corner of the MSS at a distance of about 20 meters from the wall, originally part of a network of canals that had supplied the agricultural plots along this stretch of the Badia, mostly dry now, but occasionally fed when the dam upstream did a controlled release. I will return to the canal. The mud brick walls were the relevant feature for what came later. The interior of the mud brick had been original. The exterior had been reinforced with a layer of cement render in places, and with stacked HESCO in others. But the mud brick was the original material, and mud brick is a porous, irregular material that does strange things to sound and to small currents of air. The walls were not solid in the way a HESCO barrier is solid. They breathed. You could feel the temperature of a mud brick wall change when the wind shifted on the other side of it. You could feel pressure changes in your ears when the wind picked up. The mud brick walls of the MSS were the ears of the MSS, and over the next 2 nights they would tell us things we did not want to know. I spent the morning reorganizing the watch and checking the weapons. I had every man in the squad break down and clean his rifle, the saw, and our 2 assigned crew-served weapons. I had every man check his ammunition. I had every man check his iron. By iron I mean the literal iron in our gear. The steel plates in the carriers, the steel of the rifle barrels, the steel of the bayonets we did not normally carry but which were in the team house in a duffel, the steel of the medic's surgical instruments. I had everyone bring out the iron tent stakes and check them. I had everyone count the salt packets in the field ration accessory packs. I did not tell anyone why. I told them it was an inspection. They did the inspection. The squad obeyed me without asking why, because we had been operating together long enough that the men trusted me to have a reason. The reason I had was small and not yet articulated. The reason was that I was thinking about Bashir's words from the morning before, and about the small bundle in his lap, and about salt and iron and water, and I was not yet ready to admit to myself what I was thinking. At noon I had Owen check Trent again. Trent was still in his bunk, pulse normal, pressure normal, pupils slow. Owen said, "Pupils were slow yesterday." I said, "Were they this slow?" Owen said, "Maybe." He said, "It is hard to tell." He said, "I do not have a baseline for him. I made a note of pupils slow." I told Owen to wake Trent up, get him to drink water, get him to eat something. Owen said, "Yes, Sergeant." The midday bird did not come. The weather report from FOB indicated an incoming sandstorm 12 to 24 hours out, and rotary wing flights were grounded. Owen looked at me when Travis relayed the message. I looked at Owen. We did not say anything. There was nothing to say. At 1400, I went outside to check the perimeter on foot. I walked the full circuit. I checked each HESCO section. I checked each section of mud brick. At the southwest corner, near the irrigation canal, I stood for a long time and looked at the canal. The canal was dry. There was no water in it. There had not been water in it for 2 weeks. The dam upstream was on a controlled release schedule. The schedule for this stretch was sporadic. I had read somewhere in our pre-deployment briefing materials that the dam released water about once every 3 weeks, for about a day at a time, and that the local farmers timed their planting around it. The next scheduled release was, I was almost sure, in about 10 days. I took a long look at that dry canal. I do not know why. I do not know what part of me was already running calculations about the canal. I know I looked at it for a long time and thought about water and about how far away it was. I went back to the TOC. I sent Travis a message that I wanted on his next routine comms with the FOB, a discreet inquiry to the Civil Affairs cell about the dam release schedule. He looked at me for a beat and did not ask why he sent the inquiry. The afternoon was quiet. The wind was steady from the east, hot, dry, 10 to 15 knots. The smell on the wind was the same burnt old smell from the chamber, faint, but there. By 1500, I could no longer pretend I did not smell it. I asked Wyatt. Wyatt said yes, he smelled it. He said it had been there since we got back the day before, but it had been faint. He said it had gotten stronger today. Owen smelled it, Bennett smelled it, Silas smelled it. Travis, who had a head cold, smelled it once he stepped out into the open air. At 1600, Bashir came out of the lean-to. He came to the TOC. He looked tired. His face was washed. His clothes were clean. He had the bundle in his hand. He set the bundle on the desk in front of me, and he said, Saidi, I will speak with you now. May we speak in your room, alone. I took him to my room. I closed the door. I sat on the bunk. He sat on the chair. He did not open the bundle. He set it on the floor next to his foot. He said, I will tell you the story now. I said, thank you. He said, I will use names where I cannot avoid them. I will not use the name of the thing in the chamber. I will not say it. I will speak around it. You will not say it either, Saidi, even after I have told you the story. Names are doors. I said, yes. He said, long ago, before the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were tribes that lived in the desert that were not human tribes. They were the Djinn. He said, in your tradition, Djinn are sometimes confused with Jinn or with Ifrit or with Shaitan, and the words are sometimes used as if they meant the same thing. They do not. The Djinn are a category. The way mankind is a category. There are many kinds. Some are simple, the way many men are simple. Some are great, the way some men are great. Some are very old, the way no man is old. The Djinn were created, my tradition teaches, from smokeless fire, before mankind was created from clay. He said, most Djinn are nothing to fear. They live their lives in the corners of the world that man does not occupy. They eat what they eat, they die when they die. They are no more remarkable than a wolf or a goshawk in the order of created things. He said, but some are remarkable. Some among them are great in the way a king is great, or in the way a dragon is great. They have names, they have territories. In the time before Suleiman, peace be upon him, the great ones moved among men, and some men learned how to bind them, and some men learned how to bargain with them, and the bargaining did not always go well for the men. He said, Suleiman, peace be upon him, was given by God a power over the Jinn that no man before or since has had. He could command them, he could bind them, he could press them into service. Many of the great works of the ancient world, my tradition teaches, were built by Djinn under Suleiman's command. Many of the great evils of the ancient world were ended by his command. There is a story that Suleiman, before his death, sealed many of the great ones in vessels and in chambers, and that he marked the seals with his name, and that he buried the seals in remote places where men should not find them. He said, this is the popular story, is the children's version. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that Suleiman did not invent the practice of sealing such beings. He inherited it, he improved it, he extended it, he sealed the ones that had not yet been sealed. The ones that had been sealed before him by other hands he did not seal again. He left those seals as he found them. He added his name to some of those seals, as a kind of guarantee, the way a king might add his seal to a treaty signed by his predecessor, to indicate that he honored the prior agreement. He said, "The chamber we visited yesterday is one such seal, the one that was placed by hands before Suleiman, the one to which Suleiman added his name as a guarantee of the prior agreement." He said, "The thing inside the chamber is not a small Djinn. It is not a wolf or a goshawk. It is a great one. It is one of the very old. In the language of my grandfather it has a name, but I will not say the name. In the language of my grandfather it is also called by a phrase that means the one that wears the voice. That is what I will call it. It is, in the order of creation, an Ifrit, but among the Ifrit it is one of the old ones, and the old ones are not like the young ones. The young ones are dangerous. The old ones are something else." He said, "The one that wears the voice was sealed in that chamber by men who knew what they were doing. The men who placed the seal were not Hebrew, although the Hebrews knew of them. They were not Egyptian, although the Egyptians knew of them. They were older than both. They are not now a people. Their names are not now spoken. They placed the seal because they had failed once before, in another place, with another of the old ones, and they had lost a city in the failure. They did not intend to fail again." He said, "The seal works in 3 parts. The first part is the chamber itself, which is shaped to hold. The second part is the carving, which is shaped to bind. The third part is the slab in the floor, which is the door, and the door is sealed by an absence." He said, "There is a depression in the slab. Yes, you saw it. The depression is shaped to hold a single drop of human blood. The seal is broken when the drop is given. The seal is not broken if the depression is empty." I said, "Trent did not bleed in the chamber." Bashir said, "Did he touch the depression?" I said, "I do not know." Bashir said, "Did he bleed at any point during your operation?" I said, "No." Bashir said, "Did he have an open wound, old or new?" I said, "He had a cut on his thumb from a few days ago. He had cut himself opening a can." Bashir was quiet for a long time. He said, "Was it healed?" I said, "It was scabbed." Bashir said, "Scabbed is not healed." I said, "He did not bleed." Bashir said, "A scab can give a drop, Sayyidi. A scab that catches against stone. A scab pressed into a depression. A scab that breaks open and leaves a smear that you would not see, that the wearer would not feel, that the stone would drink." I said, "He stepped on the slab." Bashir said, "He stepped on the slab." I said, "He stepped on the slab and the depression caught a thread of his scab and the scab opened against the stone." Bashir said, "It would not have taken much." I sat on the bunk. I did not say anything for a while. Bashir did not say anything for a while. Outside the room I could hear the wind against the mud brick. The wind was making a sound I had never heard a wind make before. The sound was not whistling. The sound was something like a low note held by a person who was holding it for a long time and was running out of breath and would soon need to take another breath. I said, "What does it do, Bashir?" He said, "It follows. It mimics. It calls. It learns. It eats." I said, "Eats how?" He said, "Not the way a man eats. It does not need food. It eats the way fire eats. It consumes. It takes. What it takes is, in your language, hard to name. The closest word is breath. It is not breath. It is the thing that gives a man the thing you call life. It is what makes you Caleb, and not a body shaped like Caleb." He said, "It does not always take the whole thing. Sometimes it takes a piece. The piece does not grow back." I said, "Bennett." He said, "Bennett has not yet been called. Bennett is intact. Trent is the door. The door is open. Trent will be called first, but Trent has already been touched on the inside by virtue of being the door. Trent will not be called the way the others will be called. Trent will be called from the inside." I said, "What about the others?" He said, "The others will be called by name. They will hear voices. The voices will sound like people they love. The voices will know things only those people knew, because the one that wears the voice can take the knowing along with the voice. The voices will call them out, past the wall. Whoever crosses the wall will not come back the same. Some will not come back at all. Some will come back and not be themselves. The body will return. The man will not. I said, "What protects them?" He said, "There are old protections. They are not strong. They will buy time. They will not save you forever. In a strong place, with the right hand, the protections might hold for a season. In our place, with my hand, they will hold for a night, maybe two." I said, "Tell me the protections." He said, "Salt. Across every threshold. Iron. At every door. Recitation. Continuous. By a voice that has not been taken. Distance from the chamber. Running water. The one that wears the voice cannot cross moving water." He said, "Not still water. Moving. The water has to be flowing." I said, "The irrigation canal is dry." He said, "I know." I said, "I have asked about the dam release." He said, "That was wise of you, Sayyidi. Inshallah, it will release soon." I said, "How soon does it need to release?" He said, "Tonight, Sayyidi, or tomorrow. After that we will be too thin." I sat with that. I said, "What about going to it?" He said, "At the chamber." He said, "Yes, there is a way. You go back. You reseal the slab. You put the depression back to empty. You bind the carving with a recitation. You bind the door with iron and salt." He said, "This would require, in the proper version, a man trained for the work, a scholar of the old practice. We do not have such a man here. We have me." He said, "I have read the books my grandfather kept. I have not done the work. I would attempt the work if it became necessary. I would not promise success." I said, "Would going to the chamber help if you tried?" He said, "Yes. The chamber is the seal. The seal is the place. The work is done at the place." I said, "Would you be safe at the place?" He said, "No, Sayyidi." He said, "I would be the most exposed person in the world at the place while attempting the work. The one that wears the voice would know I was there. It would be there. It would do everything it could to stop me. It would call my mother's voice. It would call my wife's voice. It would call the voice of my dead son. It would do these things." While I tried to recite the binding, "I do not know if I have the strength." I said, "You said you would attempt it." He said, "I said I would attempt it. I did not say I would succeed." I said, "How long would the attempt take?" He said, "From beginning to end, half a night. The recitation alone is a long passage. The marking with the iron is a slow business. The binding sequence has to be done in a particular order." I said, "Would another man be useful at the chamber?" He said, "Another man would be food, Sayyidi. Another man at the chamber would be food. The work is mine alone. If I attempted it, I would attempt it alone." I said, "I will not let you do it alone." He said, "You would let me, Sayyidi." He said, "You would let me because you would have no choice. You would let me because the alternative would be the loss of your squad." He said, "But it does not matter. We will not attempt the work tonight. We do not have the readiness. We will hold here. We will wait for the dam release. If the dam releases, we go to the canal. The MRAP convoy from the FOB will meet us. We will cross the canal. The thing will not cross the moving water. We will get to the FOB. From the FOB we will arrange return with a scholar of the old practice if we can find one, and the seal will be restored." I said, "Are there scholars of the old practice?" He said, "There are." He said, "Not in this country. There is a man in Cairo. There is a woman in Damascus, although Damascus is not safe for her these days. There is, if my information is current, a man in Istanbul who is American by birth, although he is no longer American." He said, "There are not many. There are enough." I said, "Would the FOB allow us to bring such a person back?" He said, "That is a question for your colonels." I said, "The colonels will not believe this." Bashir looked at me for a long moment. He said, "The colonels will believe this, Sayyidi. The colonels know about this." He said, "They may not know about this seal, this place, this binding. They know about other ones. There has been work going on for a long time in places like this by men who are not afraid to look at what they are looking at. He said, I have heard of other instances. I have heard the stories from my own community. I have heard the stories from across the border. He said, someone in your government has been looking at these places for a while. I do not know who. I do not know why. I have a guess. The guess is the same guess I have had for many years. They are looking to see if these things can be used. I said, that is the guess I have. He said, it is a common guess. I said, do you think this tasking was sent because someone wanted us to open the chamber? He said, I think it is possible. I said, do you think your name was attached to this tasking on purpose? He looked at me. He said, I had not considered that, Saidi. He looked at the wall for a long moment. He said, I was assigned to your element 3 months ago. I was assigned by the contracting officer for the interpreter program at the FOB. I did not request the assignment. I did not refuse it. I have been a teacher of history. I have written a small monograph for my own use on pre-Islamic religious sites in the Euphrates Valley, including this one. The monograph is in my notebook, Sayyidi. The notebook is in my lean-to. I have shown it to no one. I do not know if anyone has read it. I have written nothing publicly. I am one of perhaps 3 living men who has written about this site at all. He paused. He said, it is possible that someone read my notebook. It is possible I was assigned to this element for that reason. It is possible. I said, do you think it is likely? He said, I think it is more likely than I thought it was an hour ago. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the wind held the long note against the mud brick. I said, tell me what to do tonight. He gave me instructions. I will not write all of them out here. I will write the ones that mattered. He said, salt across every threshold the men sleep behind. Doubled. Salt across the front and back of the TOC. Salt across the gates, although the gates are large and the salt will not be a continuous line, so we will use larger amounts at each end and a thinner line across. Iron stakes at the corners of the perimeter, driven into the ground, joined by wire if we have wire. Recitation by him throughout the dark hours. The recitation would be of 2 passages, the first from Surah 113, the second from Surah 114, repeated continuously, with breath taken only when needed. He would do this in the TOC, at the central radio. He would not stop until dawn. He said, it will not be enough. He said, it will be enough for tonight, maybe. I said, what about voices on the radio? He said, yes. I said, what about voices? He said, do not answer them. Do not speak the names of the men on the team net unless you are certain it is them. Do not respond to anyone calling for help from outside the wall. Do not open the gate for any reason. He said, if a man on the inside hears his mother on the radio, his sister, his wife, his child, the name of someone he loves, do not let him go to the wall. He said, the voices will be the worst part. They will be very good. They will know things. They will say things that only the dead person could have said. They will call the men by names they were called as children. They will call the men by names that only their mothers ever used. He said, this is the hardest thing I will say tonight, Sayyidi. The voices will be very good. The men will believe. I cannot help with that. The protections do not protect against belief. They only keep the body of the thing on the other side of the wall. I said, what if a man crosses the wall? He said, he is gone, Sayyidi. I said, what if we go after him? He said, we lose another man. He said, do not go after him. I said, what if it is one of us? He said, do not go after him. I said, you are saying I will have to choose. He said, I am saying you will not have to choose, Sayyidi. The men will choose. The men will leave. You will not be able to stop them. Some of them will leave. He said, I am sorry. I have seen in my reading the records of what has happened in similar situations. I am giving you the truth. I said, how many will leave? He said, I do not know. He said, I will pray that the answer is none. I do not believe it will be none. I sat with that. I said, "Thank you, Bashir." He said, "Do not thank me, Saidi. I have failed you. I should have refused this assignment. I knew the moment you said the coordinates. I should have refused. I was afraid. I have a daughter in Lebanon. She lives on what I send her. I was afraid that if I refused I would lose the contract." I said, "That is not failure." He said, "It is a kind of failure." I said, "Not the worst kind." He looked at me. He said, "Not the worst kind." We made a plan for the night. He would set himself up in the TOC at 2000. He would begin the recitation at 2000. I would brief the squad at 1900. I would put 2 men on every post, with explicit orders that no one was to leave their post without 2-man confirmation, and no one was to leave the perimeter for any reason short of the FOB convoy arriving. I would assign Owen to monitor Trent at all times. I would assign Wyatt and Bennett to alternating 2-hour rotations as my deputies. I would lay the salt myself, with one of the men carrying the iron stakes. I would hammer the iron stakes at the corners myself. I asked Bashir if there was anything else. He said yes. He said, "Do not call the FOB tonight unless you absolutely must. Do not say the name of the place. Do not say what is happening." He said, "The colonels know enough already. If we call them tonight, they will tell us to hold. They will not send help that can help. They will send help that will only become more food. If we call them, we lose the morning bird. If we hold the night, the morning bird may come. The bird will not be the rescue. The bird will be only the route." He said, "The canal is the rescue. Pray the canal fills." I said, "I will pray." He looked at me. He said, "Do you pray, Saidi?" I said, "Not in the formal sense." He said, "Pray however you do it." He stood up. He picked up the bundle. He went to the door. He turned back. He said, "Caleb." It was the first and only time he ever called me by my given name. He said, "Caleb." He said, "I want to tell you, if I do not survive tonight, I would like you to know that you are not at fault. The fault is mine for not refusing. The fault is whoever's in your chain who arranged this. The fault is yours only if you fail to learn from it, and only if you fail to write it down somewhere where someone will read it after you are gone." He said, "I have a daughter named Miriam. She lives in Beirut with her mother. The address is in my notebook. If I do not survive tonight, please send the notebook to her when you are able. Please tell her I loved her." I said, "Bashir, you will survive tonight." He said, "Inshallah." He left. I sat on the bunk for a long time. I want to say here that I did not believe Bashir while he was speaking. I did not disbelieve him. I held the words at a distance from the part of me that made operational decisions. I have thought about this for a long time afterward. I think the part of me that made operational decisions could not allow itself to fully believe him, because if it did, the operational picture would have collapsed, and I would have made decisions that the system around me could not support. I think the part of me that made operational decisions made the decisions it could make. I doubled the watch. I laid the salt. I drove the iron stakes. I told the men what they needed to know to stay on their posts and not leave the wall. I did not tell them about the voices. I did not tell them about the names. I did not tell them about Bashir's recitation in the TOC, beyond saying that he would be in the TOC praying, and that they should leave him alone. I told myself I was managing information for operational tempo. I told myself a brief that included children's voices on the radio would crack discipline and lead to worse outcomes. I told myself this. I am not sure I was right. I have not been sure since. I briefed the squad at 1900. I put it as plainly as I could without crossing into what I was holding back. I told them, "We have intelligence indicating the area is being probed by hostile elements with capability to mimic voices on our team net." I told them, "Do not respond to voice traffic on the net unless you can confirm identity by face-to-face or through a code word challenge." I gave them a code word challenge protocol. The challenge was a number, and the response was a different number, and the numbers rotated by the hour. I told them, "If you hear anyone, on or off the net, calling you out toward the wall, do not go." I told them, "Maintain your post until relieved by your assigned partner, with the challenge passed and confirmed." Wyatt asked me what kind of hostile capability had voice mimicking. I said it was a new ISIS capability we had received intel on, possibly using captured radios and AI-enhanced voice synthesis. I said this with a straight face. I have lied to my men about a number of things in my career, mostly small lies, mostly to manage anxiety on a mission, and I am not proud of any of those lies. But the lie I told my men at 1900 on that second night was the worst lie I have ever told, and I have not forgiven myself for it. Bennett looked at me as I was saying it. Bennett knew. Bennett did not know the details. Bennett had been at the chamber. Bennett had seen Bashir at the chamber. Bennett had felt the cold and smelled the burnt old smell, and Bennett had heard Trent on the radio the night before, and Bennett had been a ranger long enough to recognize when a brief was being filtered. He did not say anything. He nodded. He went to his post. I laid the salt with Wyatt at 2000. We laid it across every doorway, doubled. We laid it across the gate openings, with thicker piles at each end where the salt meant something and a thinner line across where the salt would have to do. We laid it across the top of every HESCO section we could reach. We laid it across the irrigation channel access at the southwest corner, although Bashir had said the salt was not needed there because the canal itself, when it had water, would be the line. We laid it anyway. We had salt to spare. I drove the iron stakes at 2030. 4 of them, 1 at each corner of the perimeter. I drove them with a wooden mallet because Bashir had told me iron driven by iron makes a different sound than iron driven by wood, and that the difference mattered, although he could not tell me why it mattered. I drove them deep, until only the tops were visible. I tied them with 30-gauge wire that I scrounged from the engineer kit. The wire connected the 4 stakes in a kind of square outside the perimeter, closer to the wall than the wall itself, the stakes sitting 2 feet outside the actual wall, and the wire running between them at ankle height. I do not know what the wire was meant to do. Bashir said it would help. He did not say how. At 2000, Bashir went into the TOC. He sat down at the central radio desk. He did not turn on the radio. He took out his notebook and opened it to a marked page. He took out the small iron nail from his bundle. He set the nail on the desk in front of him, point oriented north. He took a pinch of salt from the small cloth bag and laid it across the desk in a thin line in front of the nail. He took out the folded paper with the prayer. He laid it open on the desk, weighted at the corners with a coin, a bullet, a key, and a small flat stone. He picked up his prayer beads. He began to recite. I stood at the door of the TOC and watched him for a minute. He did not look at me. He was already inside the recitation. His lips moved, and the words came out very quiet, almost a whisper, in a steady cadence. The cadence was different from his speaking cadence. It was older. It was the cadence of a man reciting something he had heard his grandfather recite, with the breath of the grandfather inside the breath of the man. I closed the door of the TOC. I stood outside for a moment. I could still hear him through the door, very faintly. The wind was the loudest sound. Underneath the wind, the recitation. Underneath the recitation, nothing. I went to my post. I had assigned myself to the southwest corner, near the irrigation canal, with Silas as my partner. The southwest corner was the post nearest the canal, and the canal was what mattered to me. I wanted to know if the water came. I wanted to know it the moment it came. I had a flashlight, and I planned to walk to the canal once an hour and check it, although Bashir had told me not to leave the wall. I knew I would not actually leave the wall to check the canal. I was going to lean over the wall and shine the flashlight into the canal bed. The first hour of the watch was nothing. 2000 to 2100. The wind held its long note against the mud brick. The sky was clear above the dust haze, and the stars came down to maybe 20 degrees off the horizon, and below that the haze made everything blurry and yellow and brown. I checked the canal at 2030. The canal was dry. I checked again at 2100. The canal was dry. The second hour of the watch was the first contact. At 2200, Bennett called in his check from the south wall. Cadence right, voice right, challenge passed. I acknowledged. At 2207, the TeamNet went live with a voice that was not a voice I had ever heard on the TeamNet before. The voice said, Travis. The voice was a woman's voice. The voice said, Travis, Travis, baby. Are you on your radio? Travis, it is Mom. The voice said, Trav, can you hear me? The voice said, Trav, I have been trying to reach you. Trav, can you pick up? The voice was Travis Holmes' mother's voice. I did not know Travis Holmes' mother's voice. Travis Holmes did. He was on the East Gate with his partner Owen, and I heard on the team net his breath catch, and I heard him whisper into the open mic, Mom. I keyed up. I said very fast into the team net, do not respond. Do not respond. Maintain your post. That is not your mother. That is the hostile capability. Do not respond. There was a long pause. Travis came back on the net. He said in his own voice, his RTO voice, copy, Sergeant. The voice on the open net spoke again. The voice said, Trav, it is Mom. Mom, I do not know how I am on this radio. I think someone gave me the radio. There is a man here who said you would hear me. Trav, are you there? Trav, please. I am scared. I keyed up. I said, do not respond. The voice said, Travis Aaron. The voice said, his middle name. The voice said, Travis Aaron Holm. You answer me right now. I keyed up. I said, do not respond. I heard on the team net Travis Holmes' breath. I heard him not breathing. I heard him hold the breath. I heard, very quietly, a sound I would later identify as the sound of a man holding the open mic close to his face and making a small sound that was the beginning of a sob. The voice said, Travis, Kayla is here too. The voice said, Kayla wants to say hi. The voice was not the mother's voice anymore. The voice was the voice of a small child. The voice said, Daddy, are you there? Daddy. Travis said, into the mic. Stop. I keyed up. I said, my voice flat. Specialist Holm. Maintain your post. Confirm. Travis said, his voice cracking. Confirmed. The voice on the open net continued for another 2 minutes. It used Kayla's voice, then the mother's voice, then a male voice I did not recognize that I assume was a relative or a friend. Then it used Travis's own voice, calling for himself. I made the call to mute the team net entirely on my end. I told Travis on the backup channel to hold the position. I told Owen on the backup channel to stay close to Travis and not let him leave the gate. Owen acknowledged. The voice continued for another 40 seconds. Then it stopped. The team net went silent. The team net stayed silent for perhaps 40 seconds. Then Bennett's voice came on the team net. Bennett said, in Bennett's own voice, with Bennett's own cadence, calmly, This is Bravo team leader. I am at the south wall. I have movement to my front, west of my position, approximately 50 meters out. I am going to step out and assess. I keyed up. I said, Bravo, do not step out. Confirm, do not step out. There was a pause. Bennett said, Copy, do not step out. The pause was wrong. I knew the pause was wrong. The pause was the pause of a man who was repeating an order without intending to follow it. I had heard Bennett's pauses for 10 months. This was that kind of pause. I said, Bravo, who is your partner? Bennett said, my partner is Hayden. I said, put Hayden on. There was a longer pause. Bennett said, Hayden stepped out. Bennett said, I am going to retrieve him. I said, Bravo, do not step out. Hold your position. I am coming to you. I left my post. I told Silas to hold and to call me on the backup channel if anyone approached the southwest corner. I took the flashlight off and clipped it to my plate carrier and ran in the dark across the interior of the MSS toward the south wall. The MSS was not large. The run was perhaps 80 meters. I covered it in maybe 20 seconds at a flat sprint with my rifle up and the safety off, although I had no clear target. I reached the south wall. Bennett was standing on the south wall, on top of the wall, looking out into the desert. The wall was 9 feet high at the south side. He was standing on the parapet. The parapet was about a foot wide. He had his rifle slung. He was not in a tactical posture. He was standing flat-footed and looking out into the desert, with his head cocked the way a man cocks his head when he is listening to a faint sound. I said, Bennett. He did not turn. He said, There is a man out there, Sergeant. I said, Come down. He said, He is calling for help. I said, That is not a man. He said, "He is hurt. He is sitting in the sand. He is calling my brother's name." I said, "Bennett, you do not have a brother." He turned his head. He said, "I do not have a brother." He said it slowly, like he was discovering it. He said, "But I had a brother." I said, "That was a long time ago." He said, "I had a brother." I said, "Come down off the wall." He said, "He is calling Mason." I am going to stop here for a second and tell you something that I do not want to write, but that I have to write. Bennett's older brother had been named something else. The voice was using a name that was not his brother's. Bennett knew in the moment that the name was wrong. He knew that the voice was using a generic name. He knew because his brother's name was a specific name and the voice was not using that name, but the voice was a brother voice. The voice was calling the way an older brother calls. The voice was saying, "Come on, get over here, I need you." The voice was using the cadence of a particular older brother that had existed in Bennett's life and was no longer there. The voice was wrong about the name. The voice was right about everything else. Bennett came down off the wall. I did not see him come down. I was looking out past him into the desert. I was looking for the source of the voice. I was looking for the shape. I saw a shape about 40 meters out in the haze, sitting in the sand, the way Bashir had described, knees drawn up, head down, the shape of a man who was hurt or tired. I saw the shape, and I knew it was not a man. I turned back toward Bennett. Bennett was already on the ground inside the wall, walking toward the south gate. The south gate was a small access door used for foot patrols. It was salted. It was bolted on the inside. Bennett was walking toward it. Hayden, by the way, had not stepped out. Hayden was at the foot of the wall on the inside, his rifle in his hands, his face white. Bennett had told him to stand down before climbing the parapet, and Hayden had complied because Bennett was his team leader. He had not been able to stop Bennett from climbing. He had been about to call me on the backup channel when I arrived. He looked at me and shook his head once, and I understood that Bennett had been on the parapet for at least a minute before I got there. I ran. I caught Bennett at the gate. He had unbolted the gate. He had his hand on the door. The salt line was on the inside of the door, in front of his boots. He had not yet stepped over the salt line. I tackled him low, into the dirt, 3 feet inside the salt line, and I held him there. He fought me for about 5 seconds. Then he stopped fighting me. He went still under my weight. I rolled him onto his back and kept my forearm across his chest. I looked at his face. His eyes were open. His pupils were wide. He said, "Mason," he said, "I am sorry, Mason. I am sorry. I know it was not your fault." He was looking past me, up at the dark sky. He was not seeing me. I yelled for Owen. Owen came. Owen had Travis with him, holding Travis by the bicep. Travis was pale. Owen kneeled down. Owen put his hand on Bennett's forehead. He took Bennett's pulse. He looked into Bennett's eyes with his red lens light. He said, quietly, "Sergeant." I said, "What?" Owen said, "Pulse is fine. Pupils are blown." I said, "Do something." Owen said, "I do not know what to do." I said, "Bashir." Bashir was in the TOC. Bashir was reciting. I could not pull Bashir off the recitation. The recitation was the only thing standing between us and the next assault, whatever the next assault was going to be. I knew this because Bashir had told me. I knew it the way I had known 2 minutes earlier that the shape in the desert was not a man. I said to Owen, "Keep Bennett here. Keep him on the ground. Do not let him stand." I picked Bennett up under the arms and dragged him backward through the dirt, away from the gate, away from the salt line, into the courtyard. I propped him against the wall of the team house. I told Owen to sit with him and hold him there. I told Travis to go back to the east gate. Travis went. I told Hayden to leave the south wall and go to the north tower with Wyatt. Hayden went. Bennett looked up at me. His pupils were starting to come back. He said, quietly, "Sergeant, I am sorry. I am sorry." I said, "Stay here." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "Stay here, Bennett. Stay here." He stayed. I went back to the south wall. I climbed the parapet. I looked out. The shape in the desert was still there, sitting in the sand. I watched it for maybe a minute. It did not move. Then it stood up. I am going to describe this carefully because I want the description to be exact. The shape stood up. It stood up by extending what I am going to call its legs, although they did not extend in stages the way human legs extend. They lengthened, as a single motion. The shape was sitting, and then it was standing, and the standing took less than a second. When it was standing, the shape was perhaps 10 feet tall, although the haze made it hard to be sure. The shape did not have a definite outline. The edges of it shimmered the way heat shimmers above a road. There was a darker mass at the center of it, roughly the shape of a person, but the edges blurred outward into something like smoke or mist, and the smoke or mist did not behave the way smoke or mist behaves in a wind. There was a steady wind blowing east to west across that section of desert, and the smoke did not move with the wind. The smoke moved as the shape moved. The smoke was part of the shape. The shape was facing me. I am sure it was facing me because I could feel myself being looked at. The shape took one step toward the wall. The step covered 5 meters. The shape took a second step. The shape was now 30 meters from the wall. I keyed up. I said, on the team net, incoming at the south wall, hold all positions. Do not engage unless engaged. I am holding the south wall. The shape took a third step. The shape was now 20 meters from the wall. The shape stopped. It stopped at a line in the sand that I could not see. I looked down at the ground in front of the wall. I could see, faintly, in the moonlight, the wire I had run between the iron stakes that afternoon. The shape had stopped at the wire. It stood there for a long time. It did not look at me anymore. It looked down at the wire. The smoke at its edges flexed and pulsed in a way that did not match any wind I had ever felt. The dark mass at its center seemed to lean toward the wire, and then pull back as if testing the line. After perhaps 2 minutes, the shape took a small step backward. Then another. It backed up to its previous position, 40 meters out. It sat down again. It drew its knees up. It put its head down. It became again a shape that looked like a hurt man. The wire had held it. I do not know if the wire was the actual line. I think the wire was a help, but I think the actual line was something else. I think the actual line was a combination of the wire and the salt and Bashir's recitation in the TOC, together, all three, forming something like a circuit. I think the shape backed up because the circuit was active. I think the shape was assessing the circuit. I stayed on the parapet. I watched the shape for the next 4 hours. It did not move from its position. Periodically, the team net went live with voices. It used Wyatt's wife's voice once. It used Owen's mother's voice. It used a voice that I did not recognize, but that Silas, on a backup channel, told me was his pastor from his hometown in South Dakota, who had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Each time the voice came on, I keyed up and I said, "Do not respond." Each time, my men acknowledged. We held. At 0100, the team net went silent and stayed silent. At 0110, the recitation in the TOC stopped. I called Bashir on the backup channel. He did not answer. I called Wyatt and told him to go to the TOC and check on Bashir. Wyatt went. He came back on the channel 2 minutes later and said, "He is fine, Sergeant. He is taking water. He is going to start again in 5 minutes." Bashir restarted the recitation at 0115. He recited until 0500. He recited for a total of 9 hours, with 3 breaks, none longer than 5 minutes, throughout the night. I have no way to convey what that man did that night. He was 53 years old. He was not in the best physical condition. He was not a religious scholar. He was a teacher of secondary school history who had read his grandfather's books. He sat at a desk in a TOC in eastern Syria, and he held a line that no one else in our chain of command would have known how to hold, and he held it through the night. While the thing that wore the voice paced our wire and tried, every 20 minutes or so, a different voice on our radio. He held until dawn. Without him, we would have lost more men than we lost. I do not know how many more. I am not sure it matters. The number of men we lost was already too many. We lost Silas. I did not see how Silas was lost. I was on the south wall watching the shape. Silas was on the southwest corner where I had left him. Silas was alone. I had been his partner. I had left him at the post when I ran to the south wall to deal with Bennett. I had not gone back to relieve him. I had not put another man on him. because I had been preoccupied with the shape, and with Bennett, and with Travis, and with the voices. This was my mistake. It is the mistake I think about the most. What I know about how Silas was lost is what I learned from Wyatt afterward. Wyatt heard, on the team net, a child's voice calling Silas's name. Silas had a son. Silas's son was 9 months old. The voice on the net was not Silas's son's voice, because his son was 9 months old and could not speak. The voice on the net was a child's voice calling Daddy. Silas keyed up. Silas said, in his own voice, "That is not my son." Silas was correct. The voice continued. Silas held his post. The voice continued for 40 minutes, intermittently. Silas held his post. At 0300, the voice changed. The voice used Silas's wife's voice. The voice said Silas's wife's full name. The voice said, "Silas, please, our boy is sick. The boy needs you. Please, come help." Silas keyed up. Silas said, "I cannot." The voice continued. It became more specific. It used details. It used the name of the hospital where Silas's son had been born. It used the name of his wife's mother. It used the address of the apartment where they had lived in Charleston. Silas held his post. At 0320, the voice fell silent. At 0322, Silas reported. On the backup channel, "I have movement to my front, low, perhaps 15 meters out." I keyed up. I said, "Do not engage. Hold position. I am coming." Silas said, "It is on the ground. It is crawling. Sergeant, it is a child." I said, "It is not a child." Silas said, "I know." I said, "I am coming." I came off the south wall as fast as I could. The southwest corner was perhaps 40 meters across the interior. I covered it. I had my rifle up. When I got there, the post was empty. The salt line at the foot of the post was broken. The break was a single boot-shaped scuff. Going outward, Silas was outside the wall. I climbed the post. I looked over the wall. The southwest corner of the perimeter sat about 10 meters from the irrigation canal. The canal was dry. Silas was in the canal. He was lying face down. He was not moving. I keyed up. I said, "Silas is down outside the wall. Owen, Wyatt, get to me at the southwest corner." They came. We assessed. Silas was 10 meters out, in the dry canal. There was no movement around him. There was no shape. The shape on the south wall, when I looked back across, was no longer in its previous position. It had moved. We did not go after Silas immediately. I waited until first light. We had no choice. Going outside the wall in the dark with the shape unaccounted for would have meant losing more men. I held us inside. I called Bashir on the back channel. Bashir said, "Hold. Hold until light. Recite with me, if you can." "I cannot, Saidi, hold the recitation alone for much longer." I sat under the south wall with Wyatt and Owen and the rest of the squad, except Travis, who was at the east gate, and Bennett, who was still propped against the team house wall with his eyes open and the pupils slowly returning to normal. We sat under the wall, and we recited, along with Bashir, in our broken English, approximations of the prayer. None of us Muslims, none of us trained, holding the syllables we had heard him use as best we could remember them. We did this for perhaps 40 minutes, until the first edge of light came up in the east, and then we stopped. At 0530, I went over the wall with Wyatt. We found Silas. He was dead. I will not describe his wound. I will say that it did not match any combat trauma I have ever seen. I will say that the medical report later filed at the FOB attributed it to small arms fire, which it was not, and to enemy contact, which it had not been. I will say that I did not push back on the medical report, although it was a lie, and that I have thought about that decision for 2 years, and that I do not know if pushing back would have done anything other than ruin my career and accomplish nothing for Silas's wife and son. We carried him back inside the wall. Owen wrapped him in a poncho liner. We laid him in the chow tent. Owen did the field expedient documentation and identification. He took photographs for the formal casualty report. He did this with his usual calm, which I think was costing him by then more than it had ever cost him before. He had been a medic for 5 years, and he had lost men to enemy fire and to IEDs and to vehicle accidents, and he had documented all of them with the same calm. This was the first time I saw his hands shake while he did the documentation. The sun came up the rest of the way. The wind held east. The shape was no longer visible from the south wall. The desert in the morning, in the haze, looked empty. It was not empty. We knew it was not empty. We did not need to look any more to know. Bashir came out of the TOC at 0600. He sat down on the dirt outside the door. He drank water. He did not look up at me when I came over to him. He said, quietly, "Sayyidi, I am sorry. I tried." I said, "It was not your fault." I sat down next to him. I said, "Thank you, Bashir." He said, "Do not thank me." I said, "I am thanking you." He said, "I held the line until I could not. I held it until the breaks. I broke for water. I broke when I had to use the restroom. I held it for the rest of the night. The breaks were when it came through." I said, "It came through because I left Silas alone at his post. The breaks did not matter. I left him alone." He said, "It is no one's fault, Caleb. It is everyone's fault. It is mostly the fault of the man who wrote the tasking." He said, "I will tell you who I think wrote the tasking. I have been thinking about this all night. I will tell you tonight." I said, "Tonight." He said, "Tonight, Sayyidi. We have to live through today first." I said, "The bird should be coming today." He said, "The bird will not come." I said, "We have to call FOB." He said, "We have to call them." He said, "We have to call them now." We called the FOB at 0615. I will not write the call out in detail because the call was largely operational and largely uninteresting, except for two things. The first thing was that the FOB confirmed the bird was scrubbed for the day due to weather. The sandstorm Bashir had predicted was now confirmed to be coming through that night, with peak winds expected between 2000 and 0400. The bird could not fly until at least the following morning. The second thing was that the FOB acknowledged my report of 1 KIA and offered no comment on the circumstances. They did not ask me to elaborate. They did not request a description of the wound. They did not request photos. They acknowledged the casualty, logged it, and moved on. That was the first time during the deployment that I had reported a KIA and not been asked by some staff officer to elaborate. I knew at 0615 on that morning that Bashir's guess was correct. Someone at the FOB level or above the FOB level knew what was happening. They did not need elaboration. They had elaboration. I asked the FOB about the dam release. They said the Civil Affairs Cell had been contacted. They said the cell had reached out to the dam authority through the relevant channels. They said the response from the dam authority was that a release was not currently scheduled and that an unscheduled release was not planned. I said, "Copy." I said, "Anything else from your end?" The voice on the radio said, "Hold position. We have an MRAP convoy ready at the FOB to extract you tomorrow at 0800. Maintain the perimeter overnight. Out." The voice on the radio was not a voice I knew. It was not the duty officer's voice. The duty officer was a captain I had spoken to 100 times. The voice was older, calm, with a very slight southern cadence. The voice did not give a name. The voice signed off as actual, which is what a commander signs off as. The duty officer did not sign off as actual, because the duty officer was not the commander. I had been on the radio with the FOB commander twice, in 6 weeks. I knew his voice. The voice on the radio was not his voice either. I logged the call. I did not tell the men. I told Bashir. Bashir nodded. He said, "Yes. We are alone, Sayyidi." I said, "We are alone." He said, "Tonight will be worse than last night." I said, "Tonight will be worse." He said, "We have 1 day to prepare." I said, "Tell me what to do." He told me what to do. I will not write all of it. I will write the parts that mattered. We would prepare for a night that would last from sundown around 1830 until dawn at around 0500. That gave us roughly 10.5 hours of dark. Bashir said he could not hold a continuous recitation for 10.5 hours. He had nearly broken at 9. He needed to shorten the dark. The shortest dark was achieved by pulling everyone inside the team house, sealing every door and window with salt and iron, and waiting it out from one position. He did not like this plan because it abandoned the wall. He liked this plan because it was the only plan that had a chance of working. We would seal the team house. We would put salt across every threshold of the team house, including window sills. We would drive iron stakes into the dirt at each of the 4 corners of the team house with wire connecting them. We would pull all our gear into the team house. We would pull all of our weapons into the team house. We would pull all of our food and water into the team house. We would pull our wounded into the team house. We would pull Silas's body into the team house, because leaving him outside in the chow tent was not an option. We would have Bashir reciting at the center of the team house. We would have 1 man on each window, with weapons at the ready, although weapons were not the point. We would have 1 man at the door, also at the ready, also not the point. The point was that the team house would be a single small box that the recitation could maintain, instead of a perimeter of 150 by 80 meters that the recitation could not maintain. The point was that the perimeter was already lost. We had been pretending we still had the perimeter because we had not yet given up on the wall. We had to give up on the wall to survive. At noon, I told the men. I told them the actual brief. I had decided, sometime in the morning, that the lie I had told the night before was unworkable for the night that was coming. I sat them down in the team house, all of them, including Bashir, and I told them the truth. I told them about the chamber, and the slab, and the depression, and Trent's scab. I told them about the seal. I told them about the one that wears the voice. I told them what Bashir had told me. I told them I had lied to them about the hostile capability, and I told them I was sorry. I told them what was on the wire. I told them why the shape had stopped at the wire. I told them why Silas had walked out and why we had not been able to save him. I told them what we were going to do tonight and why. The men sat and listened. They did not interrupt. They did not laugh. They did not look at each other in the way men look at each other when they are evaluating whether their leader has lost his mind. They looked at me. They listened. When I was done, Wyatt said, "Copy that, Sergeant." He said, "Anything else we need to know?" I said, "Yes." I said, "If any of you hear voices on the radio or near the wall, voices of people you love, voices of people you have lost, voices of children calling your name, do not respond, do not engage. Do not move. The voices will be very accurate. They will say things only those people knew. The voices will not be those people. The people whose voices are being used are not in danger and are not present. The voices are bait." Owen said, "Roger." Bennett said, "Roger." Bennett's voice was Bennett's voice. The people's had come back to normal an hour earlier. He was sitting up. He was tired but lucid. I had told him separately that he had walked toward the gate the night before and that I had tackled him. He had said, "I do not remember." He had said, "I remember the voice." He had said, "I am sorry, Caleb." Travis said, "Roger." Hayden said, "Roger." I want to flag something here that I noticed in the moment and then put aside. Hayden said, "Roger," but he said it like a man saying Roger, because everyone else was saying Roger. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the door of the team house. He looked at the door of the team house in the way Bennett had looked at the south wall the night before. I should have flagged it then. I did not. I had a list of things to flag. The list was long. The team house was filling up with gear. The salt had to be laid. The stakes had to be driven. There were 2 hours of light left. I had to brief Bashir on the comms plan. I had to write a final report for the FOB if we did not make it through the night. I told myself I would talk to Hayden privately at sundown. I did not. I should have. By sundown the wind was already picking up and the storm was coming and there was no privacy. Hayden, by the way, was a quiet kid. He had not said much in the briefing the night before. He had not said much in the briefing that morning. He had stood his post the night before. He had not been called by a voice the night before, as far as I know. The voice had not called Hayden. I think the voice had been working its way through the squad in some order I did not understand, and Hayden had been further down the list. I think Hayden's name came up on the list that night. We laid the salt at 1600. We drove the stakes at 1630. We pulled the gear into the team house. We pulled the food and water. We pulled Silas in his poncho liner and laid him along the back wall beneath the window. Owen took a moment to crouch down next to him and to put his hand on Silas's shoulder through the poncho liner before he stood up. Owen did not say anything when he stood up. We pulled Trent. Trent had been in his bunk in the team room. The team room and the team house were connected, but the team room had its own door. We had been treating the team room as part of the secured space. By 1600, Bashir had told me that the team room was not secure. The team room had a window onto the courtyard, and the salt across the window was thinner than the salt at the team house thresholds, and the team room did not have iron stakes at its corners. Bashir said, "Bring him into the team house." Bashir said he should not be alone tonight. I went to get Trent. Trent was sitting up in his bunk. The fever was gone. His eyes were Trent's eyes. The pupils tracked. He looked tired. He looked like Trent on a bad day. He smiled at me when I came in. He said, "Sergeant." I said, "I am moving you." He said, "Where to?" I said, "Team house. We are consolidating tonight." He said, "Yeah, I figured." He said, "I heard the brief." I said, "How much of it did you hear?" He said, "Enough." He said, "I am sorry, Sergeant. I think I touched the slab." I said, "How?" He said, "I knelt down. I traced the carving. I had a scab on my thumb." He said, "I felt a small sting. I assumed I had broken the scab. I did not say anything. I assumed it was nothing." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "It is not your fault." He said, "It is partly my fault." I said, "It is partly all of our faults. It is mostly the fault of the man who sent us." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah." He stood up. He swayed for a second. He picked up his rifle. He picked up his saw. He came with me to the team house. He laid his weapons down inside the door. He took a position by the window on the south side, the window facing the courtyard. He sat down with his back against the wall under the window. He closed his eyes. He said, "Tell me when to wake up." I said, "When something happens." He said, "Copy." He went to sleep. Or he closed his eyes. Owen sat across from him, watching him. I have wondered since whether Trent was already gone by then, whether the man who walked from the team room to the team house was Trent, or whether he was a body shaped like Trent. I do not know. I think he was Trent, mostly, with something else in him. I think the something else was waiting for the dark. The wind picked up at 1800. The wind was coming hard from the east now, 20 knots gusting to 30, full of grit. The horizon to the east was a wall of yellow-brown. The sandstorm was perhaps 3 or 4 hours out. The light was already failing because the dust was thick enough to filter the sun. The sun went down behind us, in the west, into a clean orange band, while the dust came up in front of us. It was a strange evening. It looked like a normal sunset on one side of the sky and an oncoming wall on the other. We sealed the team house at 1900. We pulled the door closed. We laid the final line of salt across the threshold from the inside. Wyatt and I traced the salt around the windows from the inside. Travis and Owen taped over the windows from the inside with green 100-mile-an-hour tape, leaving small slits to see through. We taped the slits with thin lines of salt embedded in the tape. Bashir sat up at the central table. He laid out his iron nail. He laid out his beads. He laid out the prayer. He laid out a small bowl of water that he had asked me to fill from our drinking supply. He laid out a pinch of salt around the bowl. He sat down. He looked at me. He said, "I will begin." I said, "Begin." He began. The recitation started at 1905. The wind was at 25 knots and rising. I will tell you, briefly, what the team house looked like inside. It was a single rectangular room, about 30 feet long by 15 feet wide, divided in the middle by a partial wall that did not reach the ceiling. The front half had a table, a stove, a small sink, 2 folding chairs, and a row of footlockers along one wall. The back half had bunks. The bunks had been pushed against the walls. The center of each half was open. The team house had 4 windows, 2 on the long walls and 1 on each end. The door was at one end. Silas was laid along the back wall under the back window. Trent was at the south window. Owen sat across from Trent. Bennett was at the door, with his rifle across his knees. Wyatt was at the north window. Travis was at the back window, opposite Silas. Hayden was at the south window, on the courtyard side near Trent, with his back to the wall and his rifle in his lap. I was near Bashir, at the central table, where I could see all 4 windows and the door. Bashir was reciting. The first hour was nothing. The wind kept rising. By 2000 it was at 35 knots, and the dust against the windows was a steady hiss. The team house creaked. The mud brick walls of the older structure outside, which the team house was built against, made small popping sounds as the wind hit them. The floodlights on the towers, still running on the generator that had not yet failed, flickered now and then as the dust hit them. At 2015, the generator died. It died the way it had died the night before. Not a sputter, a clean stop. The lights went off. The interior of the team house went dark, except for the small flames of 2 oil lamps Bashir had set up on the table. We had decided not to use battery-powered light during the recitation, because Bashir had said something about the recitation reacting badly to the white spectrum of LED. I did not understand what he meant. I trusted him. The radios went down with the generator. We had handheld radios on battery. Travis had set the handhelds to the team net at low volume, on the table next to him. The handhelds came on faintly through static. Bashir kept reciting. At 2030, the first voice came on the team net. The voice was a woman's voice. The voice said, "Wyatt." Wyatt did not respond. The voice said, "Wyatt, Wyatt." The voice said, "It is Aaron." Wyatt did not move. The voice said, "Wyatt, we are at the hospital. Wyatt, the baby is sick. The baby has a fever. Wyatt, please. The hospital says we need consent for the spinal tap. They cannot reach you." Wyatt looked at me. I shook my head. Wyatt did not respond. The voice said, "Wyatt." It said his middle name. It said his last name. It said his social security number. In full, the way a hospital intake clerk would have read it. It said the name of the hospital where his daughter had been born. It said the address of his house in Tennessee. It said the names of his neighbors. Wyatt put his hand over his mouth. I did not move from the table. I looked at Wyatt. Wyatt was holding it together. Wyatt was a ranger. Wyatt knew. Wyatt held. The voice continued for perhaps 8 minutes. Then it stopped. Bashir kept reciting. At 2100, the wind hit 50 knots. The team house creaked harder. The hiss of dust against the windows was constant. The oil lamps flickered. We had to relight one of them. At 21:15, the second voice came. This voice was for Owen. The voice was Owen's brother's voice. Owen's brother had died in a car accident at age 16, when Owen had been 11. The voice said things only Owen and his brother had known. The voice was, by Owen's account, afterward, accurate, down to the smallest details. The voice told Owen things about the day his brother had died that Owen had not told anyone, not his parents, not his wife, not me. The voice was relentless, in a way the voices the night before had not been relentless. The voice spoke for almost 20 minutes. Owen sat across from Trent with his hand on his rifle and tears running down his face, and he did not move. He did not speak. He held. I have never been more proud of a man in my life than I was proud of Owen Mendel that night. I want to say that here, in writing, where it counts. Owen sat through 20 minutes of his dead brother's voice telling him things only his brother could have known, and he did not respond, and he did not break, and he held the position. He did this because I had told him to, and because his training was good, and because he was a man of unusual personal strength. He did this because he was Owen. I am writing this for his wife to read, if she ever does. Owen, you held. Your brother would have been proud. At 2140, the voice for Owen stopped. Bashir kept reciting. The wind was at 60 knots. The sandstorm had hit us full. The horizon outside the slits in the tape was nothing. Yellow, brown, blowing dust. We could not see the towers. We could not see the gate. We could not see the wall. We could only see the small patch of courtyard immediately outside each window, lit by the diffuse glow of nothing in particular, since the moon was full, but the dust was thick enough to hide the moon entirely. At 2200, the third voice came. The voice was for Hayden. The voice said, "Hayden, sweetheart." Hayden's mother's voice. Hayden's body went still. Not the kind of still a soldier holds. A different kind of still. the still of a person who has just heard something he has been waiting to hear without knowing he was waiting. The voice said, "Hayden, Hayden, baby, where are you? Hayden, can you hear me?" I keyed up. I said, on the team net, "Do not respond." Hayden was not responding. He was not moving. His eyes were on the radio. The voice said, "Hayden, Hayden, I am alone. Hayden, the men came to the house. The men are in the house. Hayden, please." I said, "Hayden, look at me." Hayden looked at me. I said, "That is not your mother. Your mother is fine. Your mother is in a small town in Iowa. The men are not in her house. There are no men in her house. That voice is not her." He said, "It sounds like her." I said, "It is not her." He said, "I know." He said it the way Silas had said "I know" on the backup channel 2 minutes before he had walked out. I said, "Stay where you are, Hayden." He said, "Yes, Sergeant." He stayed where he was. The voice continued. The voice said specific things. The voice said the name of Hayden's dog when Hayden had been 6. The voice said the song Hayden's mother had sung to him when he was very small, and the voice sang it badly in Hayden's mother's actual voice, and the voice broke off in the middle of a verse, the way a mother breaks off a song when she has been startled. The voice said, "Hayden, the men are inside the house now. Hayden, baby, please. Hayden, I love you." Hayden was not crying. His eyes were dry. His face was very pale. He was looking at the radio. I said, "Hayden." He looked at me. I said, "Look at me. Stay with me." He said, "Yes, Sergeant." The voice continued for another 4 minutes. Then the voice changed. The voice became a man's voice. The voice was an older man's voice, calm, speaking quietly, the way a man speaks to a young child. The voice said, "Hayden, Hayden, son." Hayden's body convulsed once. The voice was Hayden's father's voice. I learned later that Hayden's father had died of a stroke when Hayden was 9. I had not known this. Hayden had never mentioned a father. Hayden talked about his mother. He did not talk about his father. I assumed, as men sometimes assume, that the father was not in the picture for one reason or another. I did not assume the father was dead. The voice that night was the father. The voice said, "Hayden, son, I am here. I have been here for a while. I have been waiting for you." Hayden made a small sound. The voice said, "Hayden, your mother is waiting too. Your mother is here. Your mother needs you. Hayden, come on." Hayden stood up. I said, "Hayden, sit down." Hayden walked to the door. The door was at the other end of the team house from where I was sitting. Bennett was at the door with his rifle across his knees. Bennett saw Hayden coming. Bennett stood up. Bennett put his hand on Hayden's chest. Bennett said, "Hayden, sit down." Hayden looked at Bennett. Hayden's face was the face of a man who had not heard him. Hayden said, "My dad is here." Bennett said, "Your dad is dead." Hayden said, "I know." Hayden pushed Bennett's hand off his chest. Bennett did not let him. Bennett grabbed Hayden by the plate carrier. Bennett was a strong man. Hayden was a stronger man. Hayden was a 22-year-old kid who had been doing daily PT for 4 years, and he was at full operational fitness, and Bennett was a sergeant who had also been doing daily PT for years, but Bennett had been compromised the night before, and Bennett was tired, and Bennett's grip was not what it should have been. Hayden pulled away. Bennett went down on one knee. Hayden opened the door. The salt line was in front of the door, on the inside. Hayden stepped over the salt line. He stepped over it without looking at it. He stepped through the door. He stepped out into the courtyard. I came up from the table. I crossed the team house. I reached the door. The door was still open. The wind was howling through it. The dust was coming in across the threshold, and the salt line was already half blown away by the wind. I looked out into the courtyard. Hayden was walking across the courtyard. He was walking with his arms loose at his sides. His rifle was slung. He was walking the way a man walks when he is going to meet someone he has not seen in a long time. He took 10 steps. He took 20. He passed through the open courtyard, into the dust, and I could no longer see him. I could see his shape for a second longer than I could see his details. Then the shape was a shadow. Then the shadow was nothing. I keyed up. I said very fast, "Hayden, come back. Hayden, this is Caleb. Come back." The team net was silent. I said, Hayden, Specialist Voss, return to the team house. The team net was silent. I waited at the door for 30 seconds. The wind was shaking the door. I could not see Hayden. He was gone. I closed the door. I redrew the salt line with the bag of salt that Wyatt handed me. I sealed the door. I went back to the table. Bashir had not stopped reciting. I did not stop him. I sat down. I put my hands on the table. I did not look at the men. Bennett was on the floor, holding his shoulder. Bennett had hit the doorframe when Hayden had pushed him. He was not seriously hurt. He was sitting against the wall, breathing through it. Owen had gone over to him and was checking him quickly. Owen looked up at me. Owen said, dislocated. I can reset. I said, reset. Owen reset Bennett's shoulder. Bennett did not make a sound. Owen put a cravat on the arm and tied it across Bennett's chest. Bennett said, thank you, Owen. Owen said, you are welcome, Sergeant. I sat at the table. I did not say anything for a long time. Travis said, very quietly, from the back window, Sergeant. I said, yes. He said, I am sorry. I said, not your fault. He said, I know. He said, I am sorry anyway. The wind rose. The wind hit 70 knots. The team house creaked. The walls of the older structure outside made a sound that was not a popping sound anymore. The sound was a long, low-pressure sound, the kind of sound a building makes when the building has decided it has had enough. At 2300, Trent woke up. He woke up the way a man wakes up. His eyes opened. He blinked twice. He sat up. He did not yawn. He looked around the room. He said, Sergeant. I said, yeah. He said, I have to tell you something. I said, tell me. He said, I have been holding it back. He said, I have been trying to hold it back. I do not think I can hold it back anymore. He said, it is in me. I said, I know. He said, it has been in me since the chamber. I said, I know. He said, I think it is going to come out. I said, how? He said, I think it is going to come out through my mouth. He said, I think it has been waiting to come out since Hayden. I think Hayden was a kind of door. He said, I think when one of us crosses the line, it weakens what is in me. I think it is going to come out. He said, I would like to ask you a favor. I said, name it. He said, when it comes out, do not let it stay in the room. I said, what does that mean? He said, it means I would like you to put me outside. I said, Trent. He said, I am asking you. He said, you are my squad leader. I am asking you. Put me outside. He said, it will come out through me. It will be loose. The team house will not contain it. Bashir will not be able to stop it. He said, you have to put me outside the salt. He said, it will end me when it comes out. He said, I know. I have known for an hour. He said, it is going to end me whether I am inside or outside. I would prefer to be outside. I said, Trent. He said, please, please, Sergeant. I looked at Bashir. Bashir had paused his recitation. Bashir was looking at Trent. Bashir said, he is correct, Sayyidi. I said, I will not. Trent said, Sergeant, it is going to end me. The only question is whether it ends me alone or whether it ends others with me. He said, my call, my choice. I said, I will go with you. Trent said, no. I said, Trent. He said, no, Caleb. He had not called me by my first name in the 10 months we had served together. He called me Caleb. He said it the way a brother says it. He said, you stay. You hold. You get them out. He said, that is your job. My job is to take this thing out the door. My job is to die on my own legs. He said, please. I sat for a long second. I said, how do we do this? He said, I walk out. You shut the door behind me. Bashir resumes the recitation. The salt holds. The thing comes out of me. Whatever it does outside. He said, Bashir, am I right? Bashir said, yes. Trent said, you redraw the salt the moment I am out. I said, yes. Trent stood up. He did not stagger. He stood up cleanly. He picked up his rifle. He slung it. He left the SAW. He walked to the door. He stood at the door for a second. He did not turn around. He said, tell my parents I was good. I said, you were good? He said, Tell them, I said. I will tell them. He opened the door. He stepped over the salt line. He closed the door behind him. I redrew the salt. The salt held. Bashir resumed the recitation. I will not write what I heard. I will say only that I heard Trent outside walk perhaps 10 paces. I heard him stop. I heard him say something I could not make out. I heard a sound that I am not going to describe and that I have not described to anyone and that I do not intend to describe. I heard a second sound that was the silence after the first sound. I heard Bashir reciting through it, his voice steady, the syllables falling in their old slow pattern. I sat at the table. The wind was at 75 knots. I do not know what time it was when the wind started to slacken. I think it was around 0100. The hiss of dust against the windows softened. The howling of the wind dropped a register. The team house stopped creaking quite as hard. I checked my watch. It was 0110. The storm was passing. It had not been a long storm. It had been a storm sized to the night. At 0200, Travis said from the back window, "Sergeant, I think we have water in the canal." I said, "What?" He said, "I can see, very faintly, water in the canal. I think the dam released." I went to his window. I looked through the slit in the tape. I could see the canal faintly in the moonlight that was now coming through the dust again. There was a sheen on the canal floor. The sheen was moving. The dam had released. I do not know if the FOB had managed, after my call, to put pressure on the dam authority. I do not know if the dam authority had its own reasons. I do not know if the release was coincidental, or if the timing was coordinated, or if Bashir's prayers had reached someone in the world above us who controlled water. I do not know. The water came. That is what matters. I keyed up the sat phone. The sat phone, which had been intermittent all night, suddenly had a clear signal. I called the FOB. I told them, "Convoy now." I told them the canal had water. I told them I was breaking out at 0300. I told them I needed the convoy at the canal at 0330. I gave them grids. The voice on the sat phone said, "Convoy is rolling out." It was the same voice from the morning. Calm, older, slight southern cadence. I did not have time to think about it. I told the men we were moving. I told them we were leaving everything except weapons, ammo, water, and Bashir's bundle. I told them we would carry Silas. I told them we would not stop. I told them we would cross the canal. Wyatt said, "Copy." Bennett, with his arm in the cravat, said, "Copy." Owen said, "Copy." Travis said, "Copy." Bashir kept reciting. He stood up from the table while reciting. He gathered his things one-handed while reciting. He folded the prayer paper into his shirt. He picked up his beads. He picked up the iron nail. He kept reciting. I gave the order to move at 0230. We opened the door. The shape was in the courtyard. It was 30 feet from the door. It was standing in the open. It was perhaps 12 feet tall. The smoke at its edges shimmered the way it had shimmered the night before. The dark mass at its center was more defined now. It looked less like a man and more like a column of darkness with a vague suggestion of limbs. The eyes were not eyes in the sense that mine were eyes. They were absences, small dark gaps in the smoke where the light did not go. It was looking at me. I keyed up. I said into the TeamNet, "Hold. We move on Bashir's mark." Bashir was reciting. He was standing in the doorway. He was reciting at the shape. He was reciting louder than he had been reciting all night. The shape took one step backward. It was responding to the recitation. It did not like the recitation. It backed up another step. Bashir did not stop. He moved forward, out of the doorway, into the courtyard, reciting. He moved very slowly, the way a man wades into deep water. The shape backed up as he advanced, 5 feet at a time, 10 feet, 15. When the shape had backed up to perhaps the south wall, Bashir said, between syllables of the recitation, without breaking it, "Now, Sayyidi." I led them out. I put Wyatt and Bennett up front, with their rifles up. Wyatt was carrying Bennett's pack as well as his own, because of Bennett's shoulder. Owen and Travis were in the middle, with Silas. Owen and Travis were carrying Silas in his poncho liner, holding the four corners. Silas was not light. They were strong men. I was at the rear, with Bashir on my right, still reciting, still backing the shape away. We moved across the courtyard. We reached the south gate. The south gate was salted. The salt had held. I kicked the bolt and threw the door open. I checked the path outside. The path between the south gate and the canal was perhaps 30 meters of open ground. I motioned Wyatt out. Wyatt ran. Bennett followed. Owen and Travis followed with Silas. The shape took a step toward us. Bashir's voice rose. The shape stopped. Bashir kept reciting. I went out the gate. I held it open for Bashir. Bashir came out, walking backward, his eyes on the shape, reciting steadily. I closed the gate behind us and I locked it, because there was no point in leaving it open, and because closing the gate was a kind of small final act. We moved across the open ground toward the canal. The shape was now visible from outside the wall. It was at the far end of the courtyard. Where it had backed up, it was standing still. Bashir was still reciting. The recitation reached the shape over the wall. The shape did not move. We reached the canal at 0240. The canal was about 10 feet across at the top, narrowing to about 4 feet across at the bottom, with a depth of about 3 feet. The water was about a foot deep, running fast, gray-brown, full of silt, but moving. It was moving. The water was moving. Wyatt went down into the canal first. He waded across. The water came to mid-thigh on him. He climbed up the far bank. He turned and put his hand out. Bennett went next. Bennett struggled with the bank because of his arm. Wyatt pulled him up. Owen and Travis went next. With Silas. They moved Silas across the canal in his poncho liner, the body half in the water, sliding. They got him up on the far bank. I went next. I waded across. I turned around at the far bank. Bashir was on the near bank. He was reciting. He had stopped backing up. The shape was through the wall. I do not know how it had come through the wall. I do not know if it had passed over the wall, or if it had come around the wall, or if the wall had simply not been a wall to it. I know that one moment the shape was standing in the courtyard on the inside of the south wall, and the next moment it was on the outside of the south wall, advancing toward Bashir. It was perhaps 10 meters from him. I said, "Bashir." He held up his hand, the one not holding the beads. The hand said, "Wait." The shape advanced. It was perhaps 8 meters away. Bashir's voice rose to a call. He was no longer reciting quietly. He was projecting. The recitation had become a kind of song. The shape stopped. It stood at perhaps 6 meters from Bashir. Bashir was at the canal edge. He was reciting and not moving. The shape was standing and not moving. He looked at me, very briefly, while still reciting. He looked at me the way a man looks at another man when he is saying goodbye. I started to step back into the canal, to go to him. He shook his head, sharply, while still reciting. The shape took a step. Bashir spoke a single phrase that was not part of the recitation. The phrase was in a language I did not recognize. The phrase was older than Arabic. The phrase was the shape's name. The shape stopped. Bashir spoke the name again. The shape's edges shimmered. The smoke flexed. The dark mass at its center contracted. It seemed to lose definition. It seemed to be having difficulty maintaining its form. Bashir spoke the name a third time. Then he spoke the binding. I do not know what the binding was. I do not know in what language. I know that Bashir spoke a long sentence, 3 or 4 phrases joined, in a calm, clear voice that was no longer the voice of a man reciting a prayer, but the voice of a man giving an order. The order was to a thing that had been bound before, and that recognized the order, and that had to obey the order if the order came in the right words from a hand that had the authority to give it. Bashir's hand had the authority. The shape backed up. It backed up across the open ground. It backed up to the south wall. It backed up over the south wall. It went back into the courtyard. It did not vanish. It did not fade. It did not collapse. It backed up and it went back to where it had come from, and it stayed there on the far side of the wall, where I could see the top of it from where I stood at the canal edge. It did not cross the canal because it could not. It would not have crossed the canal even without Bashir's binding. It would not have crossed because the water was running. The binding was not the canal. The binding was for the chamber. Bashir was sending it back to the chamber. Bashir was telling it in a language older than Arabic, with the authority that the original sealers had used to return to its place. It would not stay there forever. The seal was broken. The binding would weaken, but it would hold for a while. Bashir turned and stepped into the canal. He waded across. The water came to his chest. He was a small man. He held the prayer paper above the water with one hand and the iron nail in the other. He waded across without stopping the recitation, breathing the syllables in tiny gasps as the cold water took his breath. He reached the far bank. I pulled him up. He was shaking. His teeth were chattering. The recitation continued, in fragments, between his shivers. I put my arm around him. I pulled him close. I said, "Stop. You can stop." He said, between shivers, "Not yet, Sadie." He said, "Until the convoy." The headlights of the MRAP convoy appeared on the eastern horizon at 0330. We were sitting on the canal bank, all of us, Wyatt and Bennett at one end, Owen and Travis with Silas in the middle, me with Bashir at the other end. Bashir reciting, in fragments, his voice cracking. The shape on the other side of the canal, just visible above the south wall of the MSS, watching us. The convoy came. The convoy was 3 MRAPs and 1 heavy gun truck. They pulled up on our side of the canal, in the open. The lead MRAP popped its rear door. A medic came out. A staff sergeant from the gun truck came out. They took Silas first. They took Bennett next, because of his arm. They took Owen and Travis. They took Wyatt. They took me. They took Bashir last, by hand, because he could no longer stand. I sat on the bench in the lead MRAP with Bashir wrapped in a blanket next to me. He stopped reciting at 0400 when the convoy reached the FOB. He did not speak the rest of the night. The FOB was 40 kilometers to the south, on the river. We rolled in at 0400. The gate guards had been told to expect us. The medical tent was already lit. 2 FOB medics took Bennett from the back of the lead MRAP and walked him over to the tent. They took Bashir on a stretcher. Owen went with Bashir. He did not ask permission. He went with him and stayed with him for the next 4 hours, until Bashir's core temperature was back up and the IV had run and Bashir was sleeping. The FOB medics let Owen sit there. They had been told that too. Silas they took to a separate tent. The mortuary affairs section was on standby. They took him in the poncho liner. They did not unwrap him in front of us. Wyatt walked next to the litter as far as the door of the tent. He stopped at the threshold. He put his hand on the litter. He stood there for a long minute. Then he walked away. Trent was not with us. Trent had stayed at the MSS. In pieces I had not gone outside the salt to see. The mortuary affairs team would go back to the MSS later that day, by air, when the wind dropped enough to fly. They would recover what was there to recover. I was not a part of that recovery. I was told later that the burn pattern on what they brought back did not match anything in the team's experience. I was told this by Owen, who saw Trent at the FOB before he was airlifted onward. Owen described it to me in a single sentence and never described it to me again, and I will not write the sentence here. Trent's parents were told he had died of injuries sustained in enemy contact. I would later be the one to call them and add what I could add. I added very little. I told them he had been good. I told them he had asked me to tell them. Hayden was not with us. Hayden was missing. The MRAP convoy had been told, on the way to the canal, to stop and look for any ranger they encountered between the FOB and our crossing point. They had not seen anyone. The dawn search by air when the wind dropped found no body and no remains. Hayden was logged as MIA, presumed taken in enemy contact, with a note that the search would continue. The search did not continue in any meaningful sense. After the 3rd day, he is still listed as missing. His mother was told he was missing in action. I called her too. I did not tell her about the voice. I told her he had been a good soldier. I told her he had spoken often of her. I did not tell her about the voice. I want to be clear about something. The voice that called Hayden out on the radio used his mother's voice. His mother is alive. She is alive in a small town in Iowa. The voice was not her. She was not in danger. The thing that wears the voice can take a voice without taking the person, and without the person knowing. The person whose voice was used does not know it was used. Hayden's mother does not know that her voice was the bait that took her son. I have not told her. I will not tell her. I will not tell anyone whose voice was used. Travis Holmes' mother does not know. Wyatt Pell's wife does not know. Owen Mendel's brother is dead and beyond knowing. The voices were taken without consent and used without knowledge, and the people they were taken from are not at fault, and the people they were taken from will not learn it from me. I sat for the debrief at 0700. The debrief was held in a small windowless room in the FOB intelligence section. It lasted, with breaks, for the next 72 hours. I gave the same account I have given here, in less detail, and with more military terminology. I did not omit anything material. I told them about the chamber. I told them about the slab and the depression. I told them about Trent's scab. I told them about the voices. I told them about the wire and the salt. I told them about Bashir's recitation. I told them about the binding at the canal. I told them what Trent had asked me to do, and what I had done, and what I would not write about Trent's last minutes outside the door. I told them about the voice on the sat phone. The senior officer in the room, an Army lieutenant colonel I had not previously met, took notes. He did not interrupt. He did not ask follow-up questions about the chamber. He did not ask follow-up questions about the voices. He did not ask follow-up questions about Trent or Silas or Hayden. He asked operational questions. He asked about the time of departure from the MSS. He asked about the route to the canal. He asked about the convoy link-up. He asked about the condition of the equipment we had left at the MSS. He asked about Bashir's contract status. He did not ask about Bashir's family. He did not ask about Bashir's notebook. I asked him on the second day whether he had questions about the chamber. He said, that is being handled at a different echelon. He said, thank you for the operational detail. He said, continue. I want to be precise about what that exchange tells you. I had given a senior intelligence officer in a forward deployed environment a debrief that included a detailed account of an entity that mimicked voices and could not cross running water, and that had killed 2 of my men and taken a third. And the senior intelligence officer had said the chamber was being handled at a different echelon. He had said this without surprise. He had said this without skepticism. He had said this without asking what an entity was, or what mimicking voices looked like, or what running water had to do with it. He had said this the way a man says something when the topic is being handled by someone above his pay grade, and he is comfortable with the arrangement. I logged that and continued. On the morning of the 3rd day of the debrief, a man came into the room. He came in during a break. The lieutenant colonel was outside on the phone. The note-taker, a young specialist, was in the chow tent. I was alone at the table with my coffee and a stack of debrief paperwork. The man came in without knocking. He closed the door behind him. He was perhaps 65. He was wearing tan civilian khakis and a soft-collared shirt and a fleece vest with no patches. He had no name tape. He had no rank. He had no cover. His hair was gray and cut short. He was thin and weathered. His face was a face I would describe as careful, the way a face is careful when the man behind it has spent a long time deciding which expressions are useful and which are not. He sat down across from me. He said, Staff Sergeant Dorr. I said, yes. He said, my name is not important. He said, I am a civilian employee of the Department of Defense. I have a position that does not have a public title. I was, in another life, in your community, although I was Special Forces, not Ranger. He said, I retired from active service 19 years ago. I have been doing this work since. I said, what work? He said, the work that handles your debrief at a different echelon. He said it without smiling. He said it without effect. He said it the way a man states a fact. I said, I see. He said, I want to thank you for what you did out there. I said, men died. He said, yes. I said, thank you is not what I want. He said, I understand. He said, I will say it once anyway, for the record. Your team performed beyond the expectations we had for it. Your interpreter performed beyond what we had any reason to hope. Your decisions, including your decision to abandon the wall and consolidate in the team house, including your decision to honor Specialist Ashby's request, were the correct decisions. He said, "You saved 4 men with those decisions. You did not save more. We do not believe more were savable." He said, "The binding your interpreter performed at the canal was the first successful field binding by any of our partners in 14 months. The information from your debrief is, in my estimation, the most valuable single source we have generated in 3 years." I said, "My men were not a source." He said, "They were not." He said, "The information from your debrief is the source." I said, "Who is we?" He said, "That is not a question I can answer in this room." He said, "I will say only that the program is older than you would assume. It predates the War on Terror. It predates, in some respects, the Cold War, although the modern form is younger. It exists across several governments. It does not exist publicly in any of them." I said, "What does it do?" He said, "It studies these sites." He said, "It has, over the decades, attempted 4 broad approaches: observation, containment, capture, use." Each of those words means a different thing. Each has been pursued with varying success in varying decades by varying personnel. The current approach is mixed. We are mostly observing. We are sometimes attempting containment. The other 2 are dormant. I said, "This site was an observation." He said, "This site was an observation." I said, "You sent us in to confirm activity." He said, "We sent you in to confirm activity. We had reason to believe the seal was intact. We did not have reason to believe the activity, if any, would be at the level it turned out to be. The intelligence was incomplete. The intelligence is always incomplete. We sent the team that was available." He said, "I am sorry for the men you lost." I said, "You are not sorry enough." He looked at me for a long second. He said, "That is fair." He said, "I have lost teams before. I have written letters before. I will write letters again. I am sorry inside the limits of what I am allowed to be." I sat with that for a while. I said, "Who chose Bashir?" He said, "I did." I said, "Why?" He said, "I read his notebook." He said, "I read it 8 years ago." He said, "It came to my desk through a chain that began with an antiquities dealer in Cairo who had bought it from a cousin of Bashir's during a period when Bashir believed he was going to die in a coalition airstrike, and who had photographed the relevant pages and sold the photographs to a contact in Beirut who eventually sold them to a contact in Istanbul who eventually sent them to me." Bashir got the notebook back. Bashir does not know it has been read. He said, "Bashir's notebook contains, among other things, the most accurate description of the seal at that site that we have. It contains the most accurate translation of the binding. It contains, in fact, the binding itself, which Bashir spoke at the canal. He said, I needed Bashir at the site because Bashir was the only man living, to my knowledge, who had read the binding aloud and could read it aloud again. He said, I attached him to your unit 3 months ago. I had been waiting for the right tasking window. I waited for the wind to be right. I said, the wind was wrong. He said, the wind was right for our purposes. The east wind is when these things are weakest in the old reckoning. He said, I am sorry. The east wind is also when men feel the worst. There is no clean version of this work. I said, where is Bashir now? He said, he is in the medical tent. He is recovering. He will be processed out of the interpreter program in the next 24 hours. He will be relocated under the program's standard relocation. His daughter in Beirut will be notified. He will be reunited with his family. I said, I want that in writing. He said, I will not put it in writing. He said, do not put anything in writing. I said, then I do not believe you. He said, that is your right. He sat for a moment. He said, I am here to offer you a position. I said, no. He said, you have not heard the position. I said, no. He said, Staff Sergeant. He said, it knows you now. It saw your face at the canal. It heard your voice all night. It has, in the way these things have, a record of you. The record will not fade. It does not need to fade for you to live a normal life. Most of the men who have these records live normal lives. But a small number of them do not, and the difference, in our experience, is whether the man is among people who understand. The men who are among people who understand do better. The men who are not do less well. He said, I am offering you a position among people who understand. I said, what would I do? He said, you would do less than you did out there. He said, you would brief us. You would consult on operations. You would help train future teams. You would not be in the field again unless you chose to be. The position is a civilian position. The pay is fair. The work is interesting. The community is small. I said, no. He said, take a week. Think about it. I said, no. He said, take a year. The offer is good for 2 years. I said, I will not change my mind. He said, most men do not. He said, a few do. The few who do are usually the ones for whom the dreams get bad. He said, if your dreams get bad, you call this number. He slid a small white card across the table. The card had a single phone number on it. No name, no agency, no address. The card was matte. The font was old. I did not pick it up. He picked it up. He set it back down on my side of the table. He said, take the card. You do not have to keep it. I took the card. I put it in my breast pocket. I have not thrown it away. I have not called the number. I have moved the card from breast pocket to wallet to a small wooden box on my dresser, where it lives now. He stood up. He said, one more thing. I said, what? He said, do not write about this. I said, I am not a writer. He said, I know. He said, you are a man who would write about this if he found that he had to. I am asking you not to. The asking is not legal. The asking is personal. He said, writing about this will not bring back your men. It will not punish anyone in the program. It will not change policy. It will, however, draw attention to you. Some of the attention will come from us. Some of the attention will come from elsewhere. The elsewhere is the part I am asking you to be careful of. He said, write about it if you must, Staff Sergeant. If you do, write it well. Write it once. Do not draw it out. He left. I have thought about that exchange 1,000 times. I have thought about whether the man gave me his real read, or whether he gave me a calibrated read designed to make me feel important enough to stay quiet without making me feel suppressed enough to talk. I have thought about whether the offer was real, or whether it was a way to log my reaction. I have thought about why, given that they did not put anything in writing, they let me leave with the card. I have thought about the line about the elsewhere. I do not have answers. I have a card on my dresser. Bashir was processed out the next afternoon. I went to see him in the medical tent before he left. He was sitting up. He had eaten. His color was back. He looked tired the way a man looks tired after surgery, but he was lucid and his hands were steady. I asked him how he was. He said, I am alive, Saidi. I will go to my daughter. I said, I am told you will be relocated. He said, yes, I am told the same. I said, I want your address. I want to be able to reach you. He looked at me for a long second. He said, that is not how the program will work, Saidi. He said, the program will move me through several locations before placing me. The program will give me a new name in some of the documents. The program will not share my new contact information with the personnel I worked with. He said, this is normal. He said, it is for my safety. I said, I understand the policy. He said, yes. I said, I want it anyway. He looked at me. He took a small piece of paper from beside his cot. He wrote on it. He folded it. He gave it to me. He said, this is my daughter Miriam's address in Beirut, as of the last letter she sent. He said, the address may be old by the time you reach it. She moved twice last year. He said, if the program does what it says it will do, I will be at this address in the next month. If the program does not do what it says it will do, you will at least be able to reach my daughter, and through her, my wife. I said, thank you. He said, do not thank me. Write to her. Tell her I love her. He said, I have been telling her that in letters for 10 years. She has read it 10,000 times. She will read it again, if you write it. I said, I will. He said, also, Sayyidi. He said, my notebook. I said, yes. He said, my notebook was in my lean-to at the MSS. I would like it back. I said, I will see what I can do. He said, I think it is gone, Sayyidi. I said, I think it might be. He said, try anyway. I tried. I put in a request through the FOB property officer for the recovery of personal effects from the MSS. I followed up 6 times. The MSS was decommissioned and the structures bulldozed within 30 days of our extraction. The personal effects of the local national interpreter were logged as recovered and turned over to the interpreter program for delivery to the interpreter or his estate. The interpreter program had no record of receiving them. The chain ended at the FOB property officer, who eventually told me in an email that the matter was closed. I forwarded the email to the address I had been given for the interpreter program's relocation office. The address bounced. I tried to reach Bashir at his daughter's address in Beirut. I sent 3 letters in the first 6 months. The first 2 came back, marked recipient unknown. The third did not come back. I do not know if it arrived. I have written to that address 4 times since. I have not received a response. I sent money twice through a remittance service that operated in Beirut. The first transfer was received. The second transfer was returned by the service after 3 weeks, with a note that the recipient could not be located. I do not know where Bashir is. I do not know if the program relocated him as promised. I do not know if his daughter Miriam received my letters. I have written to the State Department, to the Inspector General, and to a senator's office. The replies have been variations on the same response. The matter is closed. The records are sealed. The program is not a program that can be inquired into through the channels available to me. I separated from the Army 3 months after the debrief. I went home to Idaho. I have a small house outside a town of 700 people in the northern part of the state, near the Panhandle, in a stretch of pine forest that is far enough from the highway that I do not hear the highway. The house has a wood stove. The house has no smart speaker. The house has no television. I have a laptop on which I am writing this. The laptop is on a desk in a corner of the kitchen, and I close it when I am not writing. I have a landline. The landline is an old crank-handle phone wired into a regular jack. I bought it at an antique shop. I had a friend rewire it. It works. I use it for the small number of phone calls I make. I do not own a radio. I do not own a CB. I do not own a baby monitor or any piece of equipment that picks up voices on a band I cannot control. I keep iron in the house. There is a cast iron pan on the stove. There is a horseshoe over the front door, which is something my grandmother did, for reasons I never asked, and which I now do, for reasons I would not have understood when she was alive. There is a small bag of coarse salt in a cabinet by the back door. I do not lay it across the threshold. I keep it there. The wind out here in northern Idaho is usually from the west off the Pacific. Some days in late spring, it shifts. Some days in late spring, it comes from the east, off the dry plateaus of eastern Washington. On those days, I sometimes hear my mother's voice on the wind. My mother is alive. She lives in a town outside of Salt Lake City. She is 68 years old. She was not the voice. The voice was something else, using her voice. I have heard the voice 3 times in 2 years. The first time was about 6 months after I separated. I was outside, splitting wood. The wind shifted. I heard her say my name. I thought, for a second, that someone had come up the driveway. I turned around. There was no one. The wind was steady from the east. I heard her say my name a second time. I went inside. The second time was a year later. I was on the porch, in the evening. The wind shifted. I heard her say my full name, the way she said it when I was small and had done something she wanted to ask me about without making me afraid. I went inside. The third time was 2 months ago. I was driving. I had the windows down. The wind was from the east. I heard her, in the cab, just behind my right ear. I did not stop the truck. I rolled the windows up. I did not roll them down again until I was home. I do not know if it is the same one. I do not know if it is the one that wears the voice, the one we left in the chamber, the one that Bashir bound back to its place. I do not know if it followed me, or whether some other thing of the same kind has found me, or whether the record the man in the fleece vest told me about is a thing that is read by other things, the way a notice is posted on a board. I do not know. I am writing this without knowing. I want to tell you the rest of what happened to the men in the squad. Wyatt Pell separated 4 months after I did. He went home to Tennessee. He works in residential construction now, framing houses, mostly 2-story new builds in subdivisions near Nashville. He has another child, a son, born last year, Aaron as well. The daughter is 6 and bright. He calls me every other Sunday. He has not spoken about Syria with me, and I have not asked him to. He has twice mentioned that he sometimes hears Aaron in the kitchen when he is in the garage, and that he goes inside and Aaron is not there. He has not used the word voice. He does not need to. Bennett Krause was medically separated 9 months after the deployment. The Army gave him a 50% disability rating for traumatic brain injury, which was not what he had, but it was what they could put on the form. He has a small place in northern Wisconsin. He has trouble with names. He cannot remember the names of his nephews and nieces, although he can remember their faces. He cannot remember the name of his older brother, the one whose voice the thing borrowed at the south wall. The brother's actual name is gone from him. The wrong name the thing used that night is still with him, although he never knew that name belonged to anyone. Bennett's parents have told me that he wakes up some nights and asks who is at the door. There is no one at the door. He does not seem distressed when he asks. He just asks, and they tell him no one, and he goes back to sleep. Owen Mendel is still in. He is a sergeant first class now, in a different unit, at a post I will not name. He won't talk about Syria. He won't talk about his brother either, and he used to talk about his brother. We exchange Christmas cards. We saw each other once, last year, at a Ranger reunion. We sat on a bench outside the venue for an hour. We did not talk about Syria. I told him I had heard her on the wind. He said, I know. We sat for a while. He said, I have heard him too. He said, I know it is not him. We did not say anything else. Travis Holm is in school. He is at a small college in Oregon, studying audio engineering, which is what he wanted to do before he enlisted. He is in his 2nd year. He is doing well. He kept the digital recordings from the team net of the 2nd and 3rd nights. He has them in a small fire safe in his apartment. He has not played them since the FOB. He has told me he will not play them. He has told me he keeps them because he is afraid of what would happen if he did not keep them, and he is more afraid of what would happen if he played them. He has Kayla and her mother in his life still. The voice did not take him. He held. Silas Ritter's wife had a 2nd child 6 months after his death. The child is a girl. Silas's son is now 3. I have visited them twice. In Charleston. I sit at their kitchen table and drink coffee that her sister makes. I tell her stories about Silas. I tell her the true stories that do not involve the night at the South Wall. I tell her about how he laughed. I tell her about the book he was reading and the song he was humming on the patrol that last week. I do not tell her that I left him alone at his post. I will tell her, eventually. I have not yet found the right way. Trent Ashby's parents live in a small town in Texas. I have visited them 3 times. I have told them, each time, what I told the lieutenant colonel in the debrief, with the parts about the voices. I have told them what their son asked me to do. I have told them that he made the decision himself, and that he made the right decision, and that he was a good soldier and a good man, and that I was lucky to know him. They have not asked me for the details that I have not given them. I think they know there are details I am not giving them. I think they have decided to let me carry those details. They have been very kind to me. They have sent me a Christmas card every year since. Hayden Voss's mother lives in Iowa. I have called her 4 times. The first 3 times she asked me, with great patience, to tell her what had happened. I told her what I could. I told her about the storm, and about the chaos, and about the equipment failures, and I told her that her son had been on watch, and that he had stepped outside the wall in the confusion of the night, and that we had not been able to recover him before the dawn. I told her, on the 3rd call, that I was sorry. She told me, on the 3rd call, that I did not need to keep calling. She told me, on the 3rd call, that she had decided to believe what the Army had told her, which was that her son had been taken in enemy contact, and that she had decided to believe this because the alternative was that her son had walked out into the desert, and the alternative could not be true. And so the Army's version was the version she would keep. She told me, kindly, that I should not call again. I called once more. On the anniversary, 2 years later, I left a message. She did not return it. I think she will not return it. I think she has decided, and the decision is hers to make, and I will not call her again. I am writing this in the spring of 2021. I am 31 years old. I am healthy. I am sober, although I drink a beer with dinner most nights. I have a job at a small lumber mill outside of town. The job is uncomplicated. The work is physical. The men I work with do not know I was a ranger. They think I was an infantryman. I told them I was an infantryman. They have been kind to me about it. I have a girlfriend. She lives in town. She knows I was in the army. She does not know what I did in the army. She does not know about Syria. I am not going to tell her. If she reads this, after I am dead, I am sorry I did not tell you, and I am sorry I did not tell you because I wanted to be a normal person with you, and the Syria part of me is not a normal part. I love you. I should have said that more. I am writing this because the man in the fleece vest told me not to. I am writing this because Trent's parents deserve to know what happened that night, even if I cannot say it to their faces. I am writing this because Bashir wanted at least one record of it to exist outside the system, and because I owe him at least that much. I am writing this because the mission was bait. I have thought about it for 2 years, and I am as certain of it as I am of anything I have ever been certain of. The tasking came down through irregular channels. The intelligence was wrong on every operational point, and right on the one operational point that mattered, which was the location of a thing that the program wanted observed. The captain who briefed me was not seen at the FOB after that day. The voice on the sat phone was the man in the fleece vest, before I knew his face. The casualty reports were sanitized in the same hour that they were filed. The interpreter was the only man who could have spoken the binding, and the interpreter was assigned to my unit by a man who had read the interpreter's notebook 8 years before the operation. None of that was a coincidence. We were the team they had available, in the wind they wanted, at the site they had been waiting on. The seal was broken, because they wanted to know if it could be broken. The men I lost were the cost of that information. The information was real. I am not naive. The information was useful. I do not begrudge the program the information. I begrudge the program the lie. We were not told the truth. If we had been told the truth, some of the men I lost might have lived. Trent might have asked to wear gloves. Hayden might have told us about his father. Silas might have been on the buddy team I should have given him. I am writing this because if you are reading this and you are a staff sergeant somewhere and a captain you have never seen before flies into your MSS with a tasking that does not match the imagery, and a local who you trust tells you the place has stories. Listen, do not trust the system. The system has uses for you. The system will spend you in small ways for those uses. Most of the time the spending is small enough that you can absorb it. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes you are at the wrong site, at the right wind, and the spending is the lives of your men. If the local tells you the place is older than the war, the local is right. The career you are protecting by saying yes to that tasking is not worth what you will pay. Refuse it. Take the consequences. The consequences will be smaller than the alternative. I am writing this because I do not know how much longer I will be here to write it. I do not think the thing in the chamber is coming for me. I think if it were coming for me, it would have come already. I think it is in the chamber, where Bashir put it back, and I think it will be in the chamber for some number of years, and then the binding will weaken and someone will go open it again. I do not think I will be the one to be there when it happens. I do not think it remembers me well enough for that. I think the voice on the wind is something else. I think the voice on the wind is a small, ordinary thing of the same family, finding me on the record, checking. I think I can outlast it. I think most men can. I think Bennett may not. I think Owen will. I think Wyatt will. I think Travis will, because he held. I am going to stop here. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you for staying with me. This was a long account. The men in it deserved a long account. I tried to give them one. There are other accounts on this channel from people who have been in the kind of places I have been in, and from people who have seen the kind of thing I have seen, and who are, like me, putting it down where someone outside the system might find it. If you want to listen to those, the channel is here, and I will be back if I have more to tell. Until then, take care of yourself. Listen to the locals. Watch the wind. This is Caleb, out.